The North Sea churned with malevolent fury, its grey-green waters reflecting the perpetual gloom that shrouded Azkaban fortress. Within the triangular prison that rose from the rocky outcropping like some prehistoric monument to despair, prisoner number 390 had been counting. Not days or weeks or months, though those had passed in their inexorable procession. Sirius Black had been counting heartbeats, breaths, and the slow erosion of hope that the Dementors fed upon with such relish. 3 years. 1,095 days of existence that could barely be called living. The cell walls, slick with condensation, and something that might have been centuries of accumulated misery had become as familiar to him as his own reflection once was. Before Azkaban had hollowed out his cheeks and turned his once lustrous black hair into matted tangles that hung past his shoulders like funeral shrouds. But today, something had shifted in the cosmic balance of his imprisonment. Today, Guard Macmillan was gossiping. The man possessed all the intellectual depth of a particularly dim flobberworm, which made him spectacularly unsuited for maintaining the kind of professional discretion that a maximum security magical prison typically demanded. His voice carried through the stone corridors with the thoughtless clarity of someone who had never considered that prisoners might possess functional hearing. "I'm telling you, Dawlish, it was the strangest thing. Ministry's been tracking this rat for weeks now. Not just any rat, mind you. This one's been spotted in places no ordinary rat would go. Magical signatures all wrong for a normal vermin." Sirius pressed himself against the bars of his cell, every nerve ending suddenly alive with an attention he had not felt since the day they dragged him, screaming his innocence, into this place. His fingers, bone-thin and scarred from 3 years of unconscious clawing at stone walls, gripped the iron bars until his knuckles went white. Dawlish's response came in that bored, professional tone that auras cultivated when dealing with administrative tedium. "What's so unusual about tracking a rat? We've had stranger requests from the Department for Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures." Macmillan's laugh held the particular brand of nervousness that suggested he was about to share information he probably shouldn't. That's just it. This rat's been leaving magical traces consistent with human transfiguration. Advanced stuff, too. The kind of magic that would require years of practice to maintain consistently. The world stopped. Not the literal world, of course. The North Sea continued its eternal assault on Azkaban's foundations. The Dementors continued their endless patrol of the corridors, drawing happiness from the air like some cosmic vacuum. Other prisoners continued their various forms of madness behind bars identical to his own. But for Sirius Black, everything stopped. Peter Pettigrew was alive. The realization hit him with the force of a bludger to the chest, driving the air from his lungs and sending his already fragile sanity reeling. Peter, who had died a hero's death confronting him in that muggle street. Peter, whose supposed martyrdom had been the final piece of evidence that sealed Sirius in this nightmare. Peter, who had been their secret keeper, who had betrayed James and Lily to Voldemort while maintaining the perfect facade of cowering innocence. Peter, who was apparently running around as a rat while Sirius rotted in hell for his crimes. The guards' voices faded as they moved deeper into the prison, but the damage had been done. Or perhaps, more accurately, the salvation had begun. Sirius sank to the floor of his cell, his legs suddenly unable to support the weight of this revelation. How long had it been since he had felt anything approaching hope? How long since the possibility of vindication had seemed like anything more than the fevered dream of a mind slowly disintegrating under Dementor influence? But alongside the hope came something far more dangerous. Rage. It started as a coal glowing in his chest and spread outward like fiend fire, consuming 3 years of accumulated despair and transforming it into something that burned with purpose. They had taken everything from him. His freedom, his name, his godson. They had left him to waste away while the real traitor lived free. While Harry lived with those muggle relatives. The thought of Harry struck him like a physical blow. 5 years old now. 5 years of growing up without knowing his parents, without knowing the truth about their deaths. 5 years of living with Lily's sister, who had never shown anything but contempt for the magical world. 5 years of living with people who would see Harry's magic as something to be crushed rather than celebrated. The rage that had been building in Sirius's chest suddenly found focus. It was no longer the wild, directionless fury of a caged animal. It was something cooler, more calculated. Something that whispered of transformation and freezing water, and the kind of desperate plan that could only be conceived by someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. Sirius had always been the most magically gifted of the Marauders, even if James's raw power and Remus's theoretical knowledge often overshadowed his particular talents. But Sirius had possessed something the others lacked, a wild, intuitive understanding of magic that bordered on the revolutionary. He had been the one to master the animagus transformation first. He had been the one to push the boundaries of what their textbooks claimed was possible. The Dementors, for all their soul-sucking horror, had one crucial limitation. They fed on human emotion, human memory, human despair. They could drain a wizard of his happiness and leave him a hollow shell, but they could not touch the deep, instinctual magic that resided in an animal's form. Padfoot had been sleeping for 3 years, buried beneath layers of human anguish. But Padfoot remembered things that Sirius Black, the prisoner, had forgotten. Padfoot remembered how to be patient. More importantly, Padfoot remembered how to swim. The transformation, when it finally came, felt like resurrection. One moment, Sirius was a broken man crammed into a cell barely large enough to contain his misery. The next, he was something sleek and powerful and infinitely more suited to escape than any human form could be. The prison clothes that had hung on his emaciated frame fell away as his body contracted and reformed, bones realigning, muscles shifting, consciousness sliding sideways into something more primal and far more determined. The bars that had held Sirius Black were spaced for human shoulders, human torsos. They were no obstacle whatsoever to a large black dog. Padfoot slipped through them like smoke. The corridors of Azkaban at night were perhaps the most terrifying environment in the magical world. Dementors glided through the darkness with the inevitability of death itself, their presence turning the air so cold that breathing became an exercise in controlled agony. But animals, it seemed, registered differently to them than humans did. Padfoot was noticed, certainly, but he was catalogued as vermin rather than escapee. Unimportant, beneath their attention. The irony would have been amusing if it were not so desperately necessary. The journey to the outer walls took what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Time moved strangely in Azkaban, stretched and compressed by the presence of creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. But eventually, Padfoot found himself at the base of the fortress, staring out at the churning waters of the North Sea. 50 miles to the nearest land. Water so cold that it would kill a human in minutes. Currents that had claimed ships far sturdier than one desperate dog. Padfoot dove. The shock of the water was immediate and total. It drove every conscious thought from his mind and replaced it with the pure, animal imperative to survive. Swim or die, breathe or drown, keep moving or become another casualty claimed by the prison that had been designed to be inescapable. His dog form was better suited to the water than his human shape would have been, but only marginally. The North Sea in late autumn was a killing thing, and it accepted no compromises. Every stroke forward was a battle against currents that seemed determined to drag him back towards the fortress. Every breath was stolen from waves that crashed over his head with casual malice. Somewhere in the endless struggle against the water, Sirius began to lose himself. Not to the cold or the exhaustion, though both were eating away at his strength with methodical efficiency. He began to lose himself to the sheer, overwhelming relief of finally doing something. For 3 years he had been passive, a victim of circumstances and judicial failures, and the casual cruelty of a system that had preferred convenient answers to true ones. He had been acted upon rather than acting, and that passivity had nearly destroyed him more thoroughly than any Dementor could have managed. But now he was moving. Now he was fighting. Now he was swimming toward a future that held the possibility of truth, of vindication, of finally setting things right. The mainland, when it finally appeared through the pre-dawn darkness, looked like salvation rendered in rocky coastline and scrubby vegetation. Padfoot dragged himself from the water onto a narrow beach that was probably picturesque during daylight hours, but which currently resembled nothing so much as the end of the world. His legs shook with exhaustion and hypothermia, and his vision kept sliding in and out of focus in ways that suggested he was closer to death than was entirely comfortable. But he was free. The transformation back to human form was agony. His body felt like it was tearing itself apart and reassembling in the wrong configuration. He collapsed naked onto the wet sand, retching seawater and something that might have been 3 years of accumulated despair, and tried to remember how to think in human terms again. Harry. He had to get to Harry. The thought cut through his physical misery with laser focus. Everything else, all the pain and cold and exhaustion, was secondary to that single driving need. His godson was out there somewhere, living with people who had no understanding of what he was or what he was capable of becoming. Living with people who would see his magic as a curse rather than a gift. Sirius forced himself to his feet, swaying but upright, and began walking inland. He needed clothes, obviously. He needed food and warmth and probably medical attention. But most of all, he needed to reach Little Whinging before anyone realized he had escaped. Before Dumbledore could interfere. The memory of the Hogwarts headmaster rose unbidden in his mind as he stumbled through the darkness. Albus Dumbledore, who had been conspicuously absent during Sirius's arrest. Albus Dumbledore, who had possessed both the political influence and the magical skill to demand a proper trial. Albus Dumbledore, who had instead allowed the Ministry to throw an innocent man into Azkaban without so much as a formal hearing. Why? The question had haunted Sirius through 3 years of imprisonment. But now it took on new urgency. If Peter was alive, if the real traitor was running free, then Dumbledore had to know. The man who was supposed to be the greatest wizard of the age, who made it his business to know everything that happened in the magical world, could not possibly be ignorant of such a crucial fact, which meant his silence had been deliberate, which meant Harry was in danger from more than just his Muggle relatives. Sirius quickened his pace, ignoring the way his bare feet were being torn apart by the rocky ground. Dawn was still hours away, which gave him time to acquire the basics of civilization before the wizarding world woke up and discovered his absence. But time was a luxury he could not afford to waste. Somewhere in Surrey, a 5-year-old boy was sleeping in conditions that no child should have to endure. Somewhere in Surrey, Harry Potter was growing up believing himself unwanted and unloved, unaware that he had a godfather who would move heaven and earth to reach him. Somewhere in Surrey, the last piece of James and Lily was waiting to be saved. Sirius Black began to run. The irony of his situation was not lost on him as he stumbled through the pre-dawn darkness. For 3 years he had been trapped in a cage, powerless and forgotten. Now he was free, but he was also completely alone, pursued by the entire magical law enforcement apparatus and dependent on stolen clothes and cold charity for survival. He had never been happier, because for the first time since that terrible night in Godric's Hollow, he had a purpose that extended beyond mere survival. He had a chance to set things right. He had a chance to save Harry. He had a chance to prove that sometimes love could triumph over institutional indifference. The question was whether he could reach Privet Drive before his luck ran out. The Great Hall of the Wizengamot had never hosted a trial quite like this one. The ancient chamber, with its tiered seating and imposing stone architecture, had witnessed centuries of magical justice being dispensed with varying degrees of fairness and competence. But today, it would witness something unprecedented, the complete dismantling of a conviction that had been accepted as fact by the entire wizarding world. Sirius Black walked into the hall, with his head held high and his shoulders straight, every line of his bearing radiating the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to hide and nothing left to fear. The 3 years in Azkaban had left their mark on his physical appearance, but they had not broken the essential dignity that had always characterized the best members of his family line. Behind him, Harry Potter made his entrance with the kind of grave composure that should have been impossible in a 5-year-old child. Dressed in robes that had been tailored to fit properly, rather than hanging off his thin frame like hand-me-downs, he looked every inch the heir to one of Britain's most distinguished magical families. More importantly, he looked loved and well cared for, in ways that made it immediately obvious to everyone present that whatever else Sirius Black might have been accused of, child neglect was not among his crimes. The gallery above the main floor was packed with spectators who had managed to obtain the highly coveted tickets to what was already being called the trial of the century. Representatives from every major wizarding newspaper were present, their quick quotes quills poised to capture every word for posterity and profit. Among the crowd, Sirius could see faces he recognized from his childhood and his brief adult life before Azkaban. Some showed support and sympathy for his situation. Others displayed the kind of morbid curiosity that drew people to public executions and other spectacles of human misery. All of them would leave this chamber with a very different understanding of justice than they had brought with them. Amelia Bones stood at the prosecution lectern, though her role today was more complex than that simple designation suggested. As head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, she was simultaneously presenting evidence against Peter Pettigrew, defending the integrity of her department's current investigation, and implicitly prosecuting the system that had failed so catastrophically 3 years ago. "Members of the Wizengamot," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent her entire career in service to magical justice. "We are gathered today, not to retry Sirius Black for crimes he was never properly tried for in the first place, but to examine evidence that has come to light regarding the true perpetrator of those crimes." The distinction was crucial, both legally and politically. By framing the proceedings as an investigation rather than a retrial, Amelia had managed to avoid some of the more complex procedural issues that might have delayed justice for months or years. "However," she continued, "the evidence we will present today necessarily calls into question the circumstances surrounding Mr. Black's original conviction and imprisonment. We ask the Wizengamot to consider not only the facts of the case, but the systemic failures that allowed an innocent man to spend 3 years in Azkaban without trial." Cornelius Fudge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bowler hat askew and his face pale, with the knowledge that his political career was balanced on the edge of a knife. The Minister of Magic had built his reputation on competent administration and public safety, and the revelation that his government had imprisoned an innocent man would destroy both pillars of his authority. The first witness to be called was Mundungus Fletcher, who had been retrieved from whatever hovel he currently called home and cleaned up enough to appear before the Wizengamot without causing a public health crisis. "State your name for the record," Amelia instructed. "Mundungus Fletcher," the witness replied, his voice hoarse from years of questionable living, but surprisingly clear for the purposes of testimony. "And you were present on the night of November 1st, 1981, in the area where the confrontation between Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew took place?" "I was conducting business in the area, yes." "What kind of business?" demanded one of the Wizengamot members, apparently suspicious of Fletcher's deliberately vague description of his activities. "The kind that don't concern this proceeding," Fletcher replied with more dignity than anyone had expected him to possess. "But I saw what happened between Black and Pettigrew, and that's what you want to know about." The veritaserum that had been administered to Fletcher before his testimony ensured that whatever he said would be the absolute truth as he understood it, regardless of how that truth might complicate the official narrative. "Tell us what you observed," Amelia prompted. "I saw Sirius Black chasing Peter Pettigrew down the street," Fletcher began, his testimony carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Black was shouting something about betrayal, about Pettigrew being a traitor and needing to answer for what he'd done. Pettigrew was running, crying, begging Black to listen to him. The gallery erupted in whispers as this account contradicted everything the public had been told about the confrontation. What happened next? Pettigrew stopped running and turned around. He started shouting back at Black, saying it wasn't his fault, that he'd had no choice. Then he did something with his wand, and there was this massive explosion. The explosion that killed 12 muggles? The explosion that killed 12 muggles, Fletcher confirmed. But it wasn't Black who cast the curse. It was Pettigrew. How can you be certain? Because I saw him do it, clear as day. Pettigrew cast the curse. Then he cut off his own finger and transformed into a rat, while Black was still getting back on his feet from the blast. The implications of this testimony were staggering, but Fletcher was not finished. Black wasn't trying to hurt Pettigrew, he continued. Black was trying to bring him back, alive. I heard him shouting for Pettigrew to surrender, to come back and face justice for what he'd done to his friends. The testimony concluded with Fletcher's account of watching Peter Pettigrew escape through the sewers, while Sirius Black was arrested for crimes he had been trying to prevent rather than commit. The second witness was even more damaging to the original case. Remus Lupin took the stand with the bearing of a man who had spent 3 years carrying unbearable guilt and was finally being given the opportunity to atone for his failures. "You were a close friend of both Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew during your school years?" Amelia asked. "We were all close friends," Remus replied. "Sirius, James Potter, Peter, and myself. We called ourselves the Marauders. In your opinion, would Sirius Black have been capable of betraying James and Lily Potter to Voldemort? The question that should have been asked 3 years ago hung in the air like an accusation. "Never," Remus said, without hesitation. "Sirius would have died before betraying James and Lily. He loved them like family, and he would have given his life to protect them without a moment's hesitation." "Then why didn't you come forward with this testimony during the original investigation?" "Because there was no original investigation," Remus replied, his voice thick with self-recrimination. "Sirius was arrested, declared guilty, and thrown into Azkaban without anyone bothering to ask questions about his character or his relationship with the victims. If you had been asked to testify about Mr. Black's character, what would you have said?" "I would have said that Sirius Black was one of the most loyal people I've ever known. I would have said that he would rather lose his magic than betray his friends. I would have said that anyone who knew him would find it easier to believe that the sun had decided to rise in the west than to believe that Sirius Black had betrayed James and Lily Potter." The testimony continued with Remus providing detailed character references for both Sirius and Peter, painting a picture of one man whose loyalty was absolute and another whose courage had always been questionable. More importantly, Remus testified about Peter's behavior in the months leading up to the Potter murders, describing a pattern of nervousness, secretive meetings, and increasingly desperate questions about the other Order members' activities. "I thought it was fair," Remus admitted. "We were all afraid during those months, and Peter had never been the bravest of us. I thought his behavior was just anxiety about the war, but looking back with clearer eyes, it was obviously guilt." The third witness was the most dramatic of all. Harry Potter took the stand with the kind of solemn dignity that reminded everyone present why he had become a symbol of hope for the wizarding world. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who understood the gravity of the situation and was prepared to do whatever was necessary to see justice done. "State your name for the record," Amelia said gently, her voice softening for the first time during the proceedings. "Harry James Potter," the boy replied clearly, his voice carrying through the chamber with surprising strength. "And Sirius Black is your godfather?" "Yes, ma'am. My parents chose him to take care of me if anything happened to them." "How has he treated you during your time together?" Harry's face lit up with genuine happiness as he considered the question. He's taught me about my parents, about magic, about how to be brave when things are scary. He reads to me at night and makes sure I have enough to eat and tells me that I'm important and loved. He's the best father anyone could ask for. The simple statement hit the chamber like a physical blow because it made it clear that whatever else might be debated about Sirius Black's case, his devotion to Harry Potter was absolute and reciprocal. "Can you tell us about your life before you came to live with Sirius?" Amelia asked carefully. The question opened a floodgate of testimony that painted a horrifying picture of systematic child abuse disguised as guardianship. Harry described his cupboard bedroom with matter-of-fact precision, his voice never wavering as he detailed the casual cruelty and deliberate neglect that had characterized his life with the Dursleys. The counting marks on the walls, the missed meals, the constant message that he was unwanted and burdensome. Most damning of all was his description of how his relatives had described his parents. "They told me my parents were drunks who died in a car crash," Harry said, his young voice carrying an edge of anger that made several Wizengamot members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "They told me I was just like them, worthless and bound to come to a bad end. They told me the strange things that happened around me were proof that I was mentally defective. The casual cruelty of convincing a magical child that his abilities were signs of madness sent a ripple of outrage through the gallery. How did you feel when Sirius told you the truth about your parents and about magic?" Harry's face transformed with remembered joy. "Like I finally understood who I was supposed to be," he said simply. "Like I wasn't broken after all, just different in ways that were actually wonderful instead of shameful." The testimony continued with Harry demonstrating some of the magical skills Sirius had taught him, including defensive charms that most adult wizards would have found challenging. His performance was flawless, showing both natural talent and the kind of careful instruction that could only come from someone who genuinely cared about his development. More importantly, Harry's obvious happiness and confidence made it clear that whatever legal technicalities might surround his custody situation, his welfare had improved immeasurably under Sirius's care. The fourth witness was the one everyone had been waiting for. Peter Pettigrew was brought into the chamber under heavy guard, his appearance causing audible gasps from the gallery. 3 years of living as a rat had taken a visible toll, leaving him barely recognizable as the pudgy, cheerful boy who had once been part of the Marauders. More disturbing was his demeanor. The Peter Pettigrew who had once been known for his eager-to-please personality and nervous humor had been replaced by something furtive and desperate, his eyes darting constantly toward the exits, as if he was still looking for ways to escape the consequences of his actions. "State your name for the record," Amelia commanded, her voice carrying no trace of the gentleness she had shown with Harry. "Peter Pettigrew," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you have been administered Veritaserum?" "Yes. Did you serve as secret keeper for James and Lily Potter under the Fidelius charm?" "Yes," Pettigrew replied, the word seeming to be torn from his throat against his will. "Did you reveal their location to Voldemort?" The chamber held its breath as Pettigrew struggled against the potion's compulsion, his face contorting with the effort of trying to lie while under the influence of the most powerful truth serum known to magical kind. "Yes," he finally gasped. "I told him where to find them." The admission sent shockwaves through the gallery, even though everyone present had already seen the evidence that pointed to this conclusion. "Why?" Amelia asked, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of accumulated injustice. "Because I was afraid," Pettigrew replied, tears streaming down his face. "Because he said he would kill me if I didn't help him, and I was too much of a coward to refuse." "Did Sirius Black have any knowledge of your betrayal?" "No," Pettigrew admitted. "Sirius thought I was loyal to James and Lily. He trusted me completely. Did you fake your own death on the night of November 1st, 1981? "Yes. I cut off my finger, cast the explosive curse that killed those muggles, and transformed into my rat form while Sirius was unconscious from the blast. Where have you been for the past 3 years? Living as a rat, mostly. Hiding in sewers and rubbish bins, meeting with other Death Eaters when they needed information, preparing for the Dark Lord's return. The final admission confirmed everyone's worst fears about what Pettigrew's freedom had meant for the safety of the wizarding world. The testimony concluded with Pettigrew providing detailed information about his activities during his years of supposed death, including a comprehensive list of Death Eaters who had escaped justice and continued to operate in secret. When the evidence phase of the trial concluded, the chamber was silent except for the sound of quick-quotes quills scratching frantically as reporters tried to capture every detail of what they had witnessed. Amelia Bones returned to the lectern for her closing statement, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. Members of the Wizengamot, the evidence presented today makes it clear that a grave injustice was committed 3 years ago. An innocent man was imprisoned without trial, while the real criminal lived free and continued to threaten the safety of our entire society. She paused to let the significance of this statement sink in before continuing. But this case is about more than just one man's wrongful imprisonment. It is about the integrity of our justice system, the protection of our most vulnerable citizens, and our commitment to truth over convenience. The formal exoneration of Sirius Black was unanimous. The formal condemnation of the system that had failed him was equally comprehensive. As the Wizengamot members filed out of the chamber, already beginning the complex process of reforming procedures that had been exposed as dangerously inadequate, Sirius found himself surrounded by well-wishers and reporters, all eager to hear from the man who had been vindicated after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. But his attention was focused entirely on Harry, who had moved to stand beside him with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. "How do you feel?" Harry asked quietly, his green eyes bright with curiosity and something that might have been pride. "Free," Sirius replied simply. "For the first time in 3 years, completely and truly free." "What happens now?" "Now we go home," Sirius said, putting his arm around Harry's shoulders. "We go home, and we start living the life we should have been living all along." As they left the chamber together, father and son in all but blood, the wizarding world began the long process of coming to terms with the truth about justice, innocence, and the price of institutional failure. The trial was over. The real work of building a better future was just beginning. The confession chamber deep within the Ministry of Magic had been designed for moments exactly like this one. Its walls were lined with truth detection enchantments that made deception impossible, while recording devices captured every word, every gesture, every flicker of emotion for posterity and legal documentation. Peter Pettigrew sat in the center of the room, secured to his chair by restraints that were both magical and mundane, his appearance more haggard than ever in the harsh light that illuminated every corner of the space. The Veritaserum coursing through his system had stripped away the last vestiges of his ability to lie or evade, leaving him with nothing but the terrible honesty of someone who could no longer hide from the consequences of his choices. Across from him, Amelia Bones sat with a stack of documents that represented 3 years of meticulous investigation, cross-referencing, and verification. Every question she was about to ask had been carefully crafted to extract the maximum amount of useful information while ensuring that no legal technicality could later be used to invalidate the confession. Behind the one-way observation glass, Sirius Black and Harry Potter watched the proceedings with the intense attention of people who had waited far too long for justice to be served. Harry's small hand was clasped in Sirius's larger one, their connection serving as mutual reassurance that they were finally approaching the end of their long journey toward vindication. Also present in the observation room were Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks, and several other officials whose presence ensured that whatever was revealed during this session would be properly witnessed and documented. "State your full name for the record," Amelia began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute official authority. Peter Pettigrew, he replied, the words seeming to emerge from his throat without any conscious volition on his part. You understand that you have been administered veritaserum, and that any statements you make will be considered legally binding testimony? I understand, Pettigrew confirmed, his voice hollow with the knowledge of what was about to be revealed. Let us begin with the night of October 31st, 1981. You were serving as secret keeper for James and Lily Potter under the Fidelius charm? Yes, Pettigrew replied, his face contorting with the effort of trying to resist the potion's compulsion, even though resistance was impossible. How did you come to be selected for this role? It was Sirius's idea, Pettigrew admitted, the revelation hitting the observers behind the glass like a physical blow. He suggested that Voldemort would expect him to be the secret keeper, since he was James's best friend. He thought using me would be safer, because no one would suspect the weakest member of their group. The bitter irony of Sirius having orchestrated his own downfall through an act of trust and strategic thinking was not lost on anyone present. Did you reveal the Potter's location to Voldemort? Yes, Pettigrew said, tears beginning to stream down his face. I told him where to find them. Why? The question that had haunted the wizarding world for 3 years finally received its answer. Because I was terrified, Pettigrew replied, his voice breaking with the weight of his confession. Voldemort had been winning the war, killing Order members, torturing anyone who opposed him. When he approached me and offered me the choice between betraying my friends or watching him flay the skin from my bones, I chose betrayal. The clinical precision with which he described his cowardice made the confession even more damning. Did you inform anyone of your decision to become a Death Eater? Number 1. I maintained my cover as a loyal Order member while secretly feeding information to Voldemort's forces. What kind of information? Meeting locations, membership lists, planned operations. Everything I could learn that would help the Death Eaters stay one step ahead of our efforts to stop them. The revelation that Pettigrew had been responsible for compromising multiple Order operations sent a chill through the observation room. How many deaths could be laid directly at his feet? Let us move to the night of November 1st, 1981, Amelia continued. Sirius Black came looking for you after discovering the Potters were dead? He came looking for me because he had figured out that I was the real traitor, Pettigrew confirmed. He had gone to Godric's Hollow and seen the destruction, and he knew that only the secret keeper could have betrayed their location. How did he know you were the secret keeper? Because he was the one who suggested the switch in the first place, Pettigrew admitted. He knew that if James and Lily were dead, it had to be because I had betrayed them. What happened when he confronted you? I panicked, Pettigrew said simply. I had hoped that with James and Lily dead, and with Voldemort supposedly destroyed, my betrayal would never be discovered. But Sirius was too clever, and he knew me too well. Did you attempt to flee? Yes. I tried to run, but Sirius caught up with me on that London street. He was shouting at me to stop, to surrender myself to the Aurors, to confess what I had done. What was your response? I begged him to let me go. I told him it wasn't my fault, that I had been forced to betray James and Lily, that I had no choice. Did Sirius Black believe your claims of coercion? No, Pettigrew admitted. He said that everyone had choices, even in wartime, and that I had chosen to save my own skin at the cost of my friends' lives. What happened next? The question that would finally lay to rest 3 years of speculation and injustice. I decided that if I was going to be caught, I would at least take Sirius down with me, Pettigrew confessed. I cast the explosive curse that destroyed the street and killed those 12 muggles. The casual way he described mass murder as a tactical decision revealed the depth of corruption that his years as a Death Eater had wrought in his character. Was Sirius Black responsible for any of the deaths that occurred that night? No, Pettigrew said clearly. Sirius was trying to bring me in alive. He wanted me to face justice, not to die in the street like a rabid animal. What happened immediately after the explosion? I cut off my finger with a severing charm, then transformed into my rat form, while Sirius was still unconscious from the blast. I escaped through the sewers while the auras arrested him for my crimes. The methodical nature of his deception made it clear that this had not been a panicked response, but a calculated plan to frame his former friend. Where did you go after your escape? I went into hiding, Pettigrew replied. I lived as a rat in various locations throughout London, occasionally meeting with other Death Eaters who had escaped capture. What was the purpose of these meetings? Initially, they were just about survival. Sharing information about aura activities, identifying safe locations, avoiding capture. But over time, they evolved into something more ambitious. More ambitious how? Planning for the Dark Lord's return, Pettigrew admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The words sent ice through everyone present, because they confirmed what many had suspected, but few had dared to voice. You believed Voldemort could be brought back from the dead? I knew he could be brought back, Pettigrew corrected. The Dark Lord had prepared for the possibility of physical death. He had created safeguards that would allow him to return if the proper rituals were performed. What kind of safeguards? Horcruxes, Pettigrew said, the word falling into the chamber like a curse. Pieces of his soul anchored to physical objects that would prevent his complete destruction. The revelation that Voldemort had practiced the darkest of all magical arts sent shockwaves through the observation room. Horcruxes were theoretical constructs mentioned only in the most forbidden texts, acts of such profound evil that most wizards refused to believe they were possible. How many Horcruxes did Voldemort create? I don't know the exact number, Pettigrew admitted. He was secretive about the details, but he implied that he had taken extensive precautions against death. What was your role in planning his resurrection? I was to serve as the primary agent for gathering the necessary components for the resurrection ritual, Pettigrew confessed. Blood from his enemies, bones from his ancestors, flesh from his servants. The clinical way he described the ingredients for dark magic made it clear that he had moved far beyond simple cowardice into active evil. Have you taken any concrete steps toward performing this ritual? We had begun gathering some of the necessary materials, Pettigrew admitted. But the ritual requires the presence of the Dark Lord's spiritual essence, and we had not yet located the anchor point that would allow us to contact him. The confession continued for several more hours, with Pettigrew providing detailed information about Death Eater networks that had operated in secret for years, plans for terrorist attacks that had been forestalled only by chance, and the locations of magical artifacts that had been thought lost during the war. Most importantly, he provided a comprehensive list of every Death Eater who had escaped justice in the chaos following Voldemort's initial defeat, along with detailed information about their current activities and hiding places. When the formal confession finally concluded, the chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the recording devices that had captured every word for posterity. Amelia Bones gathered her documents with the satisfied precision of someone who had just completed one of the most important cases of her career. This confession will be verified by independent magical forensics experts and presented to the Wizengamot for formal acceptance, she announced. Based on the information provided, arrest warrants will be issued for all named conspirators, and a comprehensive investigation will be launched into the extent of Death Eater infiltration of our society. In the observation room, Sirius felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to stand upright without it. "Is it over?" Harry asked quietly, his young voice carrying a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "The legal part is over," Sirius replied, pulling his godson close in a gesture that had become second nature over their weeks together. "Peter will spend the rest of his life in Azkaban. The Death Eaters he's named will be arrested, and the truth about what really happened to your parents is now part of the official record." "What about the other part?" "The other part," Sirius said thoughtfully, "is just beginning. Now we get to build the life we should have been living all along. The public reading of Pettigrew's confession took place the following day in the Great Hall of the Wizengamot, with representatives from every major magical newspaper present to ensure that the truth reached every corner of the wizarding world. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Sirius Black vindicated, screamed the headline of the Daily Prophet, followed by a comprehensive account of Pettigrew's betrayal and the systematic failures that had led to an innocent man's imprisonment. Ministry in Crisis declared Witch Weekly, focusing on the political ramifications of such a massive miscarriage of justice. The Boy Who Lived Speaks Out, announced the Quibbler, featuring Harry's testimony about his treatment at the hands of the Dursleys and his transformation under Sirius's care. But it was the editorial in the Prophet that captured the mood of the wizarding public most accurately. The case of Sirius Black represents more than just one man's wrongful imprisonment, the editorial began. It represents a complete failure of the systems we depend on to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. How many other Peter Pettigrews are walking free while innocent people languish in Azkaban? How many other children are suffering in situations like Harry Potter's while the authorities look the other way? How many other families have been destroyed by our rush to find convenient answers instead of true ones? The questions were uncomfortable, but they were also necessary. The wizarding world spent the days following the confession in a state of profound soul-searching, as individuals and institutions alike grappled with the implications of what had been revealed. Emergency sessions of the Wizengamot were called to review other cases from the war years. New procedures were implemented to prevent future miscarriages of justice. The entire Department of Magical Law Enforcement was reorganized to ensure that proper investigative protocols would be followed in all future cases. Most importantly, a special commission was established to examine the treatment of war orphans and ensure that no other child would suffer the kind of neglect and abuse that Harry Potter had endured. For Sirius and Harry, the days following the public revelation were a whirlwind of interviews, legal proceedings, and public appearances. The wizarding world seemed desperate to hear from both of them, to understand how they had survived their respective ordeals and what their plans were for the future. Harry handled the attention with the same grave composure he brought to everything else, answering questions with a maturity that impressed even the most cynical reporters. When asked about his treatment at the hands of the Dursleys, he described it with matter-of-fact precision that made his abuse all the more shocking for its casual delivery. When asked about his life with Sirius, his face would light up with genuine joy as he described the magical education he was receiving and the loving family he had found. Most memorably, when asked whether he harbored any anger toward the ministry for their failures, Harry's response was both wise and forgiving. "I think adults sometimes make mistakes when they're scared," he said, with the kind of insight that should have been impossible in someone so young. "The important thing is that they learn from those mistakes and do better next time." Sirius, meanwhile, used his public platform to advocate for comprehensive reform of the magical justice system and better protection for vulnerable children throughout the wizarding world. He also used the opportunity to honor the memory of James and Lily Potter, ensuring that their sacrifice and their love for their son would not be forgotten in the midst of all the political upheaval. 3 weeks after Peter Pettigrew's public confession, the massive investigation that had been launched based on his revelations bore fruit. Coordinated raids across magical Britain resulted in the arrest of 17 Death Eaters who had been living under assumed identities, the seizure of substantial quantities of dark arts materials, and the disruption of what appeared to be the early stages of a plan to resurrect Voldemort using the ritual Pettigrew had described. The wizarding world breathed a collective sigh of relief as it became clear that the threat of Voldemort's return had been neutralized before it could fully develop. For Sirius Black and Harry Potter, the successful conclusion of the investigation meant something even more important than public vindication. It meant freedom. Freedom from the fear that had haunted their weeks in hiding. Freedom from the uncertainty about their future together. freedom to build the family they had chosen, without interference from those who thought they knew better. As they stood together in the gardens of their new home, watching the sun set over the hills that surrounded the estate Sirius had purchased with his restored black family inheritance, both of them felt the profound satisfaction that came from justice finally being served. The trial was over. Peter Pettigrew was in Azkaban, where he belonged. The truth had been told, accepted, and acted upon. But most importantly, they had each other, and they had the rest of their lives to make up for all the time that had been stolen from them. The real adventure, they both realized, was just beginning. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Potter Manor, casting golden light across the breakfast table where Sirius Black and Harry Potter sat sharing what had become their favorite meal of the day. Not because the food was particularly elaborate, though the house elves took great pride in their culinary efforts, but because it represented something that neither of them had ever truly experienced before, the comfortable routine of a normal family. 6 months had passed since Peter Pettigrew's confession and the subsequent upheaval that had transformed the wizarding world's understanding of justice, truth, and institutional responsibility. The headlines that had dominated the magical newspapers for weeks had finally given way to other concerns, and the intense public scrutiny that had followed their vindication had settled into a more manageable level of celebrity that both Sirius and Harry had learned to navigate with grace and humor. The manor itself was a testament to the Potter family's long history of wealth and influence, but more importantly, it had been transformed into something that felt like home rather than a museum. The portraits of Harry's ancestors still lined the walls, but now they engaged in cheerful conversations with the living inhabitants rather than maintaining the dignified silence of forgotten history. The library that had once been Sirius's refuge during his darkest moments had become Harry's favorite place for afternoon lessons, its shelves filled with books that ranged from basic magical theory to advanced subjects that most wizards never encountered outside of university settings. Most remarkably, the house rang with laughter on a daily basis, a sound that had been absent from its halls for far too long. This morning's conversation focused on plans for Harry's upcoming 6th birthday, an event that would mark not just another year of his life, but the first birthday he would celebrate, surrounded by people who actually wanted him to exist. "What kind of party would you like?" Sirius asked, spreading marmalade on his toast with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to take simple pleasures for granted. Harry considered this question with the same thoughtful seriousness he brought to magical theory and advanced spell work. "Could we invite everyone?" he asked. "Remus and Tonks and Andromeda and Ted? And maybe some of the people from the ministry who helped us?" The casual way Harry referred to their extended chosen family as everyone revealed how much his understanding of belonging had evolved over their months together. The boy who had once believed he was fundamentally unwanted now took it for granted that there were multiple adults in his life who cared about his happiness and well-being. "Of course we can invite everyone," Sirius confirmed, "though I should warn you that Tonks will probably try to change her hair color to match your birthday decorations, and Remus will insist on bringing enough books to stock a small library." Harry giggled at this accurate assessment of their friends' personalities, then grew more serious as he considered something that had apparently been on his mind for some time. "Padfoot," he said, using the intimate nickname that had become his preferred way of addressing his godfather. "Do you think my parents would be proud of how we turned out?" The question hit Sirius with the kind of emotional impact that still occasionally caught him off guard, even after months of similar conversations. Harry's need for connection to his deceased parents had not diminished with time or healing, but it had evolved from desperate longing into something healthier and more sustainable. "I think your parents would be amazed by how strong and kind and brilliant you've become," Sirius replied honestly. "I think they would be proud of your magical abilities, but more importantly, they would be proud of the person you're growing into." He paused to consider his next words carefully, because this was not a subject that allowed for casual responses, "and I think they would be grateful that you found your way to people who love you for exactly who you are, rather than people who see you as a burden or a symbol or a political asset. Harry nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this assessment. Do you think they would approve of you being my dad? The question was asked with the kind of careful neutrality that suggested Harry had been thinking about it for some time, but had been uncertain about whether it was appropriate to voice. Sirius felt his throat tighten with emotion, because the answer to that question touched on everything he had been trying to accomplish since the night he had taken Harry away from Privet Drive. I think your parents trusted me with the most precious thing in their lives, he said quietly. I think they believed I would love you and protect you and help you become the person you were meant to be. So yes, I think they would approve. Harry's smile in response to this answer was brighter than any magic Sirius had ever witnessed. Their morning routine was interrupted by the arrival of the day's post, delivered by an impressive collection of owls that had become a regular feature of their household. The restoration of Sirius's reputation and the public revelation of Harry's treatment at the hands of the Dursleys had resulted in a steady stream of correspondence from well-wishers, political allies, and various individuals seeking favor or influence. Most of the letters were handled by the efficient staff that helped manage their public obligations, but some were personal enough to warrant direct attention. This morning's delivery included a letter from Hogwarts that bore the distinctive seal of the headmaster's office. Sirius opened the envelope with the kind of wariness that had become his default response to any communication from Albus Dumbledore, though their relationship had evolved considerably since the truth about Harry's situation had become public knowledge. The letter was characteristically verbose and diplomatic, but its essential message was straightforward. Dumbledore wanted to meet with both of them to discuss Harry's future magical education. What does he want? Harry asked, reading the letter over Sirius's shoulder with the kind of casual intimacy that had developed between them over months of shared experiences. He wants to talk about your education, Sirius replied. Specifically, he wants to discuss whether you should attend Hogwarts when you're old enough, or continue with the private tutoring we've arranged. The question of Harry's formal magical education had been a subject of ongoing discussion between them for months. The traditional path would involve attending Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry when he turned 11, but the unconventional nature of Harry's early magical development suggested that traditional approaches might not be the most appropriate. More importantly, both Sirius and Harry had developed a healthy skepticism about allowing other people to make important decisions about Harry's life without his input. What do you think? Sirius asked, because Harry's preferences were the most important factor in any decision about his future. I think I'd like to hear what Professor Dumbledore has to say, Harry replied thoughtfully. But I don't want to make any decisions until I understand all my options. The wisdom inherent in this approach made Sirius proud of the critical thinking skills his godson had developed during their time together. The meeting with Dumbledore was arranged for the following week, to be held at Potter Manor rather than at Hogwarts, ensuring that Harry would be comfortable and that Sirius would have equal standing in any discussions about the boy's future. When the appointed day arrived, Albus Dumbledore appeared at their door with the kind of punctual courtesy that suggested this meeting was as important to him as it was to them. His appearance had changed little since Sirius had last seen him, though there was something in his eyes that might have been regret or acknowledgement of past mistakes. "Sirius, Harry," Dumbledore said warmly as he settled into the comfortable chair they had provided in the Manor's main sitting room. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Thank you for coming here instead of expecting us to come to you," Sirius replied, the civility of his tone masking the complex emotions that Dumbledore's presence still evoked. The conversation that followed was comprehensive and remarkably frank, with Dumbledore acknowledging the mistakes that had led to Harry's placement with the Dursleys and Sirius's wrongful imprisonment. "I allowed my fear of what might happen to Harry if he grew up aware of his fame and power to override my judgment about what would actually be best for his development and well-being," Dumbledore admitted. "I believed that a normal childhood, even a difficult one, would be preferable to the attention and pressure that would come with being raised in the magical world. But it wasn't a normal childhood, Harry pointed out with the kind of direct honesty that characterized all his interactions with adults. It was an abusive childhood that made me think I was worthless and broken. "You're absolutely correct," Dumbledore replied, his voice heavy with genuine remorse. "My decision caused you harm that should never have occurred, and I take full responsibility for that failure." The acknowledgement of institutional and personal failure was more comprehensive than either Sirius or Harry had expected, though it did not erase the consequences of those failures. The discussion of Harry's educational future proved to be more complex and nuanced than a simple choice between Hogwarts and private tutoring. "Your magical development has been extraordinary," Dumbledore observed, watching as Harry demonstrated some of the advanced techniques Sirius had taught him. "Your understanding of both theoretical and practical magic exceeds that of most students who have completed several years of formal education. Is that good or bad?" Harry asked with characteristic directness. "It's remarkable," Dumbledore replied, "but it also presents certain challenges when it comes to traditional educational approaches." "What kind of challenges?" "The challenge of ensuring that you continue to be appropriately challenged and stimulated in your magical education, while also ensuring that you have opportunities to interact with peers and develop the social skills that will be important throughout your life." The solution that eventually emerged from their discussions was characteristically unconventional, but perfectly suited to Harry's unique circumstances. Rather than attending Hogwarts as a traditional student, Harry would participate in a hybrid educational program that combined advanced private tutoring with selected classes and activities at the school. This would allow him to continue developing his exceptional magical abilities while also providing opportunities for social interaction with children his own age. More importantly, it would ensure that he remained under Sirius's primary guardianship, while still benefiting from the resources and expertise that Hogwarts could provide. "What do you think, you two or you?" Sirius asked Harry after Dumbledore had left, and they were alone to discuss the proposal. "I think it sounds like the best of both worlds," Harry replied thoughtfully. "I get to keep learning advanced magic with you, but I also get to meet other children and maybe make some friends." The prospect of friendship had become increasingly important to Harry, as he had grown more confident and socially aware during their months together. "And you're comfortable with spending time at Hogwarts?" "As long as I get to come home to you every night," Harry said simply. "This is where I belong, with my family." The casual way he referred to Sirius as family warmed something deep in the older wizard's chest that had been cold for far too long. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of unexpected visitors, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, both of whom had been coming around more frequently as their own relationship had evolved from professional collaboration to something more personal and intimate. "Watcher, Harry!" Tonks called out cheerfully, as she transformed her hair from purple to bright green in honor of Harry's favorite color. "How's the birthday boy today?" "I'm not 6 until tomorrow," Harry corrected, with the kind of pedantic precision that made all the adults in his life smile. "Well then, how's the almost 6-year-old boy today?" Tonks amended with a grin. "Very good, thank you. Sirius and I have been talking about my education, and Professor Dumbledore came to visit." "Did he now?" Remus said, settling into his favorite chair with the kind of comfortable familiarity that spoke to how much time he had been spending at the manor. "And what did our esteemed former headmaster have to say?" Harry launched into an enthusiastic description of the hybrid educational program that had been proposed, his excitement about the possibilities clear in every word. "It sounds like an excellent compromise," Remus observed when Harry had finished his explanation. "You'll get the best of both traditional and unconventional magical education, and you'll get to terrorize a whole new generation of Hogwarts students with your advanced magical abilities," Tonks added, with obvious delight at the prospect. "I'm not going to terrorize anyone," Harry protested with mock outrage. "I'm going to help them learn to be better at magic." The generous spirit inherent in this response made it clear that Harry's character had not been damaged by his early experiences or his subsequent elevation to celebrity status. As the afternoon wore on, their gathering expanded to include other members of their chosen family. Andromeda and Ted Tonks arrived with an early birthday present that turned out to be a comprehensive set of advanced transfiguration texts. Several of Harry's tutors stopped by to check on his progress and offer their congratulations on his educational advancement. Most importantly, the house filled with the sounds of conversation, laughter, and the kind of easy affection that characterized all healthy families. As evening approached and their guests began to depart, Sirius and Harry found themselves alone again, settling into the comfortable routine that had sustained them through months of legal proceedings, public scrutiny, and personal healing. "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" Sirius asked as they sat by the fireplace, sharing the kind of quiet moment that had become precious during their journey from fugitives to family. Harry considered the question with the thoughtfulness that characterized all his responses to important matters. "I'm happy that Peter can't hurt anyone else," he said finally. "I'm happy that everyone knows you're innocent and that you're a good person. I'm happy that other children won't have to live the way I did with the Dursleys." He paused to consider what else needed to be said, but mostly, "I'm happy that I found out what it feels like to have a family that actually wants me." The simple statement encompassed everything they had been through together and everything they had accomplished during their months of shared struggle and growth. "I'm happy too," Sirius replied quietly. "Happier than I ever thought I would be again." "What made you the happiest?" "The day you called me Dad for the first time," Sirius admitted. "That was the moment I knew that everything we had been through was worth it." Harry smiled and settled more comfortably against Sirius's shoulder, apparently content to spend the evening in peaceful companionship. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, both of them felt the profound satisfaction that came from having built something meaningful from the wreckage of their respective tragedies. They had found each other when both of them were lost and broken. They had fought together against a system that had failed them both. They had emerged victorious, not just in legal terms, but in the more important sense of having created a family based on love rather than obligation, choice rather than circumstance, and hope rather than resignation. The next morning brought Harry's 6th birthday, celebrated with the kind of joyous enthusiasm that made up for all the birthdays he had never been allowed to enjoy. The party was everything Harry had requested, and more, with friends and chosen family gathering to celebrate not just another year of his life, but the transformation that had brought them all together. When the festivities were winding down and the last guests were preparing to depart, Harry made an announcement that surprised no one who had been watching his development over the past months. "I want everyone to know that Sirius Black is my dad now," he declared with the kind of confident authority that suggested this was a decision he had been contemplating for some time. "Not just my godfather or my guardian, but my real dad in every way that matters." The declaration was met with enthusiastic approval from everyone present, though Sirius found himself momentarily overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Harry was publicly acknowledging. "Is that all right with you, Padfoot?" Harry asked, using the intimate nickname that had become his favorite way of addressing the man who had saved him. "It's more than all right," Sirius replied, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the greatest honor anyone has ever given me." As their chosen family departed and the house settled into evening quiet, Sirius and Harry found themselves back in the sitting room where they had shared so many important conversations over their months together. "What happens now?" Harry asked, the question that had begun their journey together, now taking on new meaning as they looked toward a future filled with possibilities rather than threats. "Now we live," Sirius replied simply. "We live the life we should have been living all along. We learn and grow and help each other become the best versions of ourselves we can be." "And we stay together?" "We stay together," Sirius confirmed. "Always and forever, no matter what challenges we might face." Harry smiled and settled comfortably into his favourite position, secure in the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. Outside, the sun set over the hills that surrounded Potter Manor, casting long shadows across gardens that had been restored to beauty and purpose. Inside, a father and son sat together in peaceful contentment, surrounded by the evidence of lives well lived and love freely given. The trial was over. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed over convenient fiction. But more importantly, two people who had been broken by the failures of others had found healing in each other, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have achieved alone. They were home. They were family. They were free to build whatever future they chose to imagine, and that, both of them knew, was the greatest magic of all. Little whinging existed in that particular category of English suburbia that seemed designed to crush the human spirit through sheer, relentless mediocrity. Every house was identical to its neighbours in all the ways that mattered, distinguished only by the colour of their front doors and the precise angle at which their garden gnomes had been arranged. It was the sort of place where deviation from the norm was considered a moral failing, and where the greatest excitement most residents could expect was the annual competition for best-kept garden. Number 4. Privet Drive sat in the middle of this monument to conformity, like a particularly smug example of everything the neighbourhood represented. Its windows gleamed with the kind of obsessive cleanliness that suggested the inhabitants had far too much time on their hands and far too little imagination for what to do with it. The garden was so perfectly manicured that it looked like it had been assembled by someone who had never seen actual plants grow in actual soil. From his vantage point in the park across the street, concealed in the form of a large black dog, Sirius Black studied the house that had become his godson's prison. 2 weeks had passed since his escape from Azkaban. 2 weeks of careful movement, of stealing clothes from washing lines and food from bins, of learning to navigate the Muggle world with the kind of desperate efficiency that only came from having no other choice. He had been patient in ways that his younger self would have found impossible, because patience was the only thing standing between him and complete disaster. The Ministry would be hunting him. Every aura in Britain would have his photograph, his description, his known associates memorized. They would be watching the obvious places, the locations where Sirius Black might be expected to appear. They would not be watching a seemingly stray dog in a perfectly ordinary suburban park. He had been observing the Dursley household for 3 days now, learning their routines with the methodical attention to detail that Azkaban had burned into his soul. Vernon Dursley left for work each morning at precisely 7:30, his massive bulk squeezed into a company car that sagged visibly under his weight. Petunia spent her mornings peering through net curtains at her neighbours, apparently cataloguing their various failures to meet her exacting standards of respectability. And Harry, who appeared so rarely that Sirius had begun to wonder if the boy was actually living in the house at all. When he did emerge, it was always briefly, always reluctantly, and always under the watchful and clearly disapproving gaze of his aunt. The child who should have been running and playing and exploring the world with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old instead moved like someone who had learned that drawing attention to himself led to unpleasant consequences. The first time Sirius saw his godson, really saw him, he nearly broke his cover by transforming back into human form, right there in the middle of the park. This was not the robust, confident child he had expected. This was not the boy who should have grown up secure in the knowledge of his parents' love and sacrifice. This was a thin, pale slip of a thing who looked like he had never had quite enough to eat, who flinched away from sudden movements, who watched the world through eyes that held far too much wariness for someone who had barely lived 5 years. This was a child who had been broken before he had even had the chance to discover what wholeness felt like. The rage that filled Sirius at that moment was pure and cold and absolutely murderous. It was the kind of fury that could have powered the unforgivable curses without effort, the kind of anger that made 3 years in Azkaban seem like a minor inconvenience compared to what he wanted to do to the people who had done this to Harry. But rage, however justified, would not help Harry now. What the boy needed was rescue, not revenge. At least, not yet. So Sirius remained Padfoot, and he watched, and he planned. The opportunity came on a Thursday morning in late November. Vernon had left for work with his usual theatrical huffing about quarterly reports and incompetent subordinates. Petunia had settled in for her morning session of neighborhood surveillance, armed with a cup of tea and what appeared to be a comprehensive mental catalogue of everyone else's shortcomings. And Harry had been shoved outside with instructions to stay in the garden and not to bother anyone. Sirius approached slowly, keeping his body language deliberately non-threatening. He had forgotten, in the years before Azkaban, how naturally children responded to animals. Adults saw a large black dog and thought about insurance liability and property damage. Children saw a potential friend. Harry looked up from where he was sitting on the front step, his too thin face lighting up with something that might have been hope. It was the first time Sirius had seen anything approaching joy in the boy's expression, and it nearly broke his heart all over again. The child extended one small hand tentatively, the gesture of someone who wanted connection but had learned not to expect it. "Hello, boy," Harry whispered, his voice carrying the particular careful quietness of someone who had been trained not to make noise. "Are you lost?" Padfoot approached slowly, allowing himself to be examined and petted with the grave seriousness that children brought to such encounters. Harry's hands were gentle but desperate, as if he could not quite believe that something was showing him kindness without expecting anything in return. "You're very big, aren't you?" Harry continued, his voice gaining confidence as Padfoot settled beside him on the step. "I bet you belong to someone important. Important people have big dogs." The casual way the boy dismissed his own importance, the automatic assumption that anything good in the world must belong to someone else, made Sirius want to transform immediately and gather his godson into his arms. Instead, he remained still and let Harry continue petting his fur, storing up contact with another living being like someone preparing for famine. "I live here," Harry said, gesturing toward the house with a movement that somehow managed to convey both resignation and apology. "Well, sort of. Aunt Petunia says I'm lucky they let me stay at all, since I'm such a burden. 5 years old, and already convinced that his existence was an imposition on the world." The sound of the front door opening sent Harry scrambling backward, his face immediately closing off as Petunia Dursley emerged onto the step. She was even more unpleasant in person than she had appeared from a distance, all sharp angles and disapproving mouth and eyes that seemed to find fault with everything they landed on, including her nephew. "What is that creature doing in my garden?" she demanded, her voice carrying the kind of outraged authority that suggested she considered the entire neighborhood to be her personal domain. "Shoo! Go on, get out of here!" She made aggressive shooing motions at Padfoot, who responded by moving slightly closer to Harry. The protective instinct was automatic and probably unwise, but seeing the way the woman looked at his godson made every parental impulse Sirius possessed flare to life. "Aunt Petunia, he was just being friendly," Harry said quietly, his voice carrying a note of pleading that no child should ever have to use. He wasn't causing any trouble. Petunia's response was swift and vicious. "You don't get to decide what causes trouble in this house, you ungrateful little freak. Inside. Now." The casual cruelty of it, the automatic dismissal of Harry's perfectly reasonable request, the way she spoke to a 5-year-old like he was something she had found on the bottom of her shoe, sent Padfoot's hackles rising, a low growl built in his throat before he could stop it. Petunia took a step backward, her face going pale. "Vicious thing," she muttered, "probably diseased. Harry, get inside before it bites you." Harry cast one last, longing look at Padfoot before obeying, his small shoulders sagging with defeat. The door slammed behind them, leaving Sirius alone on the step with his rage and his growing determination to end this situation as quickly as possible. But first, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. That night, after the Dursleys had gone to bed, Padfoot made his way around to the back of the house. The garden was as aggressively perfect as the front, every blade of grass cut to regulation height, every flower bed arranged with geometric precision. It looked like a magazine photograph rather than a place where a child might be expected to play. Because, Sirius realized with growing horror, it was not a place where a child was expected to play. The back of number 4 Privet Drive told a story that the front facade had hidden. Here, away from the scrutiny of neighbors, the Dursleys' true nature was on display. The windows were barred, not with decorative ironwork, but with the kind of heavy-duty security measures usually reserved for prisons. The back door was reinforced and bore multiple locks, and in the cupboard under the stairs, visible through a small, dirty window that sat barely above ground level, was Harry Potter's bedroom. Sirius stared through that window for a long time, his human consciousness struggling to process what he was seeing, while Padfoot's simpler, more direct understanding cut straight to the heart of the matter. This was wrong. This was cruelty disguised as guardianship. This was a child being systematically destroyed by the people who were supposed to protect him. The space was barely large enough for a grown man to stand upright, let alone serve as a bedroom for a growing child. The walls were rough wood, unpainted and marked with what looked like years of desperate scratching. A thin mattress that had seen far better days was shoved into one corner, covered with blankets that looked like they had been salvaged from charity donations. A single shelf held a few books that appeared to be educational texts, rather than anything a child might actually enjoy reading. And on the walls, scratched into the wood with what must have been fingernails or broken toys, were marks, tally marks, grouped in sets of 5, covering nearly every reachable surface. Harry was counting something. Days, maybe. Or punishments. Or meals missed. The realization that his godson was living in conditions that would have been condemned as inhumane for an adult prisoner sent Sirius into a fury so complete that he nearly lost control of his transformation, right there in the garden. Only the knowledge that losing his cover now would help no one kept him in dog form. He needed to see more. He needed to understand the full scope of what was being done to Harry before he could figure out how to fix it. The next morning brought fresh horrors. Sirius watched from the park as Harry emerged for his daily exile to the garden, and this time he was close enough to see details that distance had mercifully hidden before. The boy was not just thin, he was malnourished. His clothes hung off his small frame like hand-me-downs from someone twice his size, which they probably were. His hair, which should have been thick and unruly like his father's, was brittle and dull, and when he moved, he favored his left side in a way that suggested recent injury. The morning routine, observed in its entirety, was a masterpiece of casual abuse disguised as normal family life. Vernon emerged from the house like a force of nature, complaining loudly about everything from the weather to the government to the state of his breakfast. Petunia fussed over him with the devoted attention of someone whose entire identity was wrapped up in maintaining her husband's comfort. And Harry sat on the step, silent and invisible, waiting to be noticed only long enough to be dismissed again. When Dudley emerged, the dynamic became even more disturbing. Vernon's son was a year older than Harry, and already well on his way to matching his father's impressive bulk. But it was not his size that made Sirius's blood run cold. It was the casual way he shoved past Harry. The automatic cruelty that suggested such behavior was not only permitted, but encouraged. Time for nursery school. "Dudders," Petunia announced, her voice warm with affection that was never directed toward Harry. "Mummy's packed your favorite lunch." "What about Harry?" Dudley asked, and for a moment Sirius felt a flicker of hope that perhaps one member of this family possessed some basic human decency. The hope died quickly. "What about him?" Vernon rumbled, glancing at Harry with the kind of casual contempt usually reserved for insects. "He'll stay here and try not to break anything." Again, the implication that Harry was routinely blamed for household damage, whether he caused it or not, was clear enough, but it was Petunia's response that truly revealed the depth of their cruelty. "He can clean the kitchen while we're gone," she said, as if discussing a household appliance rather than a 5-year-old child. "The baseboards need scrubbing, and he's small enough to reach the difficult corners." Harry nodded without complaint, as if being assigned manual labor while his cousin went to school was perfectly normal, as if he had never known anything different, as if he had been trained to expect nothing better. The family departed in their overly large car, leaving Harry alone with instructions that included a list of chores that would have been excessive for an adult employee, let alone a child who should have been playing with toys and learning his letters. Sirius waited until they were gone before approaching the house again. This time Harry was waiting for him. "You came back," the boy said, his face lighting up with genuine joy. "I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure. Most things don't come back once they leave." The casual acceptance of abandonment in that statement nearly broke Sirius's heart. He settled beside Harry on the step, offering the silent comfort of his presence, while his mind raced through possibilities and plans. "I don't suppose you can understand me," Harry continued, scratching behind Padfoot's ears with unconscious expertise. "But it's nice to have someone to talk to. Aunt Petunia says I talk too much. But I don't think I do. I think I just talk at the wrong times." The boy's voice carried the particular cadence of someone who had spent a lot of time alone with his own thoughts, working out explanations for the inexplicable cruelty of the adults in his life. "Would you like to see my room?" Harry asked suddenly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not supposed to let anyone inside. But you're not really anyone, are you? You're just a dog." The casual way Harry dismissed his own importance, even in the context of breaking rules, made Sirius want to transform immediately and explain exactly how important Harry Potter actually was. Instead, he followed the boy around to the back of the house, where Harry produced a key from beneath a loose brick and opened the door to his cupboard bedroom. The smell hit Sirius first, damp and neglect, and the particular staleness that came from too many people living in too small a space for too long. Then came the visual confirmation of what he had glimpsed through the window. This was not a bedroom. This was a storage space that had been grudgingly converted to house an unwanted child. "It's not much," Harry said, his voice carrying a note of apology, as if the conditions were somehow his fault, rather than a deliberate choice made by the adults responsible for his care. "But it's mine, sort of. And it's better than sleeping outside." The casual way the boy suggested that sleeping outside was a real possibility made Sirius's vision go red around the edges. What kind of people used homelessness as a threat against a 5-year-old? What kind of people had Dumbledore left Harry with? Harry settled onto his thin mattress, patting the space beside him in invitation. Padfoot joined him, offering what comfort he could, while his human mind catalogued every detail of this travesty. The tally marks on the walls were not random. They were organized, grouped, methodical. Harry was not just scratching at the wood in boredom or frustration. He was keeping track of something with the desperate precision of someone who had learned that information was the only form of control available to him. "I count everything," Harry explained, following Padfoot's gaze to the marks on the walls. "Days since I did something wrong. Meals I get. Meals I don't get. Hours in here when they have company and don't want anyone to know I exist." The matter-of-fact way he described being hidden away like a shameful secret made Sirius want to tear the house down with his bare hands. "Sometimes I count how many words Aunt Petunia uses when she's angry with me," Harry continued. "Yesterday it was 47. The day before it was 62. I think 62 might be the record. A 5-year-old boy should not have been keeping statistical records of his own abuse. A 5-year-old boy should have been playing with toys and learning nursery rhymes and secure in the knowledge that the adults in his life would protect him from harm. A 5-year-old boy should not have been living in a cupboard, counting the ways the world had failed him. The sound of a car in the driveway sent Harry scrambling to his feet, his face immediately going pale with panic. "They're back early," he whispered, shoving Padfoot toward the door. "You have to go. If they find you here, they'll be angry. And when they're angry with me, it's worse." The casual acceptance of collective punishment, the automatic assumption that Harry would bear the consequences of any disruption to the household peace, was the final piece of evidence Sirius needed. He had seen enough. That night, after the Dursleys had gone to bed, Sirius Black made his decision. Harry Potter was not going to spend one more night in that cupboard. Harry Potter was not going to count one more day of systematic neglect and casual cruelty. Harry Potter was going to discover what it felt like to be wanted, to be loved, to be treated like the precious miracle he actually was, instead of the burden his relatives had convinced him he represented. The plan that formed in Sirius's mind was simple, desperate, and probably illegal by both magical and Muggle standards. He was going to kidnap his godson. And if Albus Dumbledore or anyone else had a problem with that, they could explain to him exactly why they thought a child belonged in hell. The transformation back to human form had never felt more necessary or more terrifying. Sirius knelt beside Harry's cupboard door at 3 a.m, his hands shaking with a combination of adrenaline and the magnitude of what he was about to do. Inside, he could hear the soft, careful breathing of a child who had learned not to make noise even in sleep. The lock on the cupboard door was a simple Muggle mechanism, the kind of thing that was meant to keep a curious child from wandering into dangerous cleaning supplies rather than imprisoning someone. It yielded to a whispered Alohomora, with barely a click. Harry was awake instantly, sitting up on his thin mattress with the sharp alertness of someone who had learned that consciousness was safer than vulnerability. In the dim light filtering through the tiny window, his eyes were enormous in his pale face. "Don't be afraid," Sirius whispered, his voice rusty from disuse, but gentle in ways it had not been for 3 years. "I'm here to help you." The boy stared at him for a long moment, processing the appearance of a stranger in his bedroom with the kind of careful evaluation that no 5-year-old should have needed to develop. "You're not the dog," Harry said finally, his voice carrying a note of disappointment that nearly broke Sirius's heart. "I am the dog," Sirius replied softly. "I'm also a man. It's complicated magic, but I promise I'll explain everything once we're somewhere safe." Harry tilted his head, studying Sirius with the same grave attention he had given to Padfoot earlier. "Magic is real?" he asked, as if this were the most important question in the world. Which, Sirius realized, it probably was. For a child who had been told his entire life that he was a freak, that the strange things that happened around him were signs of his fundamental wrongness, confirmation that magic existed would be nothing short of revolutionary. "Magic is very real," Sirius confirmed. "And you, Harry Potter, are one of the most magical people who has ever lived." The boy's expression cycled through disbelief, hope, and something that might have been desperate hunger for validation. "Are you sure?" Harry whispered. "Because Aunt Petunia says I'm just broken. She says the things that happen around me are because there's something wrong with me." The casual cruelty of convincing a magical child that his abilities were signs of mental illness made Sirius want to march upstairs and have a very pointed conversation with Petunia Dursley. Instead, he focused on the boy in front of him. "Your aunt is wrong about many things," Sirius said carefully. "You're not broken. You're not a freak. You're a wizard, Harry, just like your parents were." "My parents?" The word came out like a prayer. "Your mother was Lily Evans Potter, one of the most talented witches of her generation. Your father was James Potter, and he was my best friend in the entire world. They loved you more than anything else that existed, and they died protecting you." Harry absorbed this information with the peculiar stillness that children brought to life-changing revelations. "Did you know them well?" he asked finally. "I knew them so well that they asked me to take care of you if anything ever happened to them. I'm your godfather, Harry. My name is Sirius Black, and I've been looking for you for a very long time." The boy considered this, his small face serious with concentration. "If you're supposed to take care of me, why am I here?" he asked, gesturing around the cupboard with a movement that somehow managed to encompass all the neglect and casual cruelty he had endured. It was the question Sirius had been dreading, because it forced him to confront the extent of his own failures alongside the institutional ones that had landed Harry in this nightmare. Because some very bad people lied about me, and I was put in a prison for something I didn't do. I couldn't come for you before now because I was locked away, but I've escaped, and I'm here now." Harry nodded, as if this explanation made perfect sense, which it probably did to someone who had spent his entire life being blamed for things beyond his control. "Are we going away?" Harry asked, and there was something in his voice that suggested he had been hoping for exactly this possibility for longer than any child should have to hope. "We're going away," Sirius confirmed. "Right now, if you're ready." "I don't have much to pack," Harry said, glancing around the cupboard. "Most of my things belong to Dudley anyway." The casual acceptance of having nothing that was truly his own was heartbreaking, but Sirius pushed past his emotional response to focus on practical necessities. "That's all right. We'll get you new things. Better things. Things that are actually yours and that no one can take away." Harry slid off his mattress and began gathering what few possessions he could call his own. A broken toy soldier that looked like it had been retrieved from a rubbish bin. A book about dinosaurs that was missing half its pages. A single photograph that he kept hidden beneath his pillow. Sirius caught a glimpse of the photograph and felt his breath catch. It was a picture of James and Lily, probably taken during their Hogwarts years, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Someone had given Harry a picture of his parents, and he had treasured it despite having no idea who they were. "Where did you get that?" Sirius asked gently. "I found it," Harry said, clutching the photograph protectively. It was in a box of old things Aunt Petunia was throwing away. She said it was rubbish, but the people in it looked nice. I thought maybe they might be my parents, but I wasn't sure. The idea that Harry had been reduced to scavenging through rubbish to find connections to his own heritage made Sirius's vision go red around the edges. When this was over, when Harry was safe, he was going to have a very long conversation with the Dursleys about their definition of guardianship. "They are your parents," Sirius confirmed. "And you're right, they were very nice people. The nicest people I ever knew." Harry smiled for the first time since Sirius had known him, and it transformed his entire face. For just a moment, he looked like the confident, happy child he should have been allowed to become. "Are you ready?" Sirius asked. Harry nodded and followed him out of the cupboard, through the house, and into a future that held possibilities he had never been allowed to imagine. The journey to their temporary sanctuary took the better part of the night. Sirius had chosen a location in the Scottish Highlands, far enough from civilization to avoid casual discovery, but close enough to a small village that they could acquire supplies when necessary. The cottage belonged to a distant Black family cousin who had died several years ago, and whose property had been tied up in magical probate ever since. More importantly, it was warded against detection by anyone who did not carry Black family blood. They travelled by Muggle transportation, a series of night buses and early morning trains that carried them steadily north, while Harry stared out windows at a world he had never been allowed to explore. His excitement was carefully contained but unmistakable, the barely restrained wonder of someone experiencing freedom for the first time. "Is all of this really happening?" Harry asked, as they settled into seats on the final train that would carry them to Scotland. Sometimes I dream about going away, but I always wake up in the cupboard." "This is really happening," Sirius assured him. "You're never going back to that cupboard. I promise. What if the bad people who lied about you find us?" "Then I'll protect you," Sirius said simply. "That's what godfathers do." Harry considered this, his small face serious with concentration. "I don't think I know how to be protected," he admitted finally. "I've always had to take care of myself." The matter-of-fact way he accepted that a 5-year-old should be responsible for his own welfare was devastating. But it also revealed something important about Harry's character. This was not a child who had been broken by his circumstances. This was a child who had learned to survive them. "That's all right," Sirius said gently. "We'll figure it out together." The cottage, when they finally reached it, was exactly what Sirius remembered from his childhood visits. Small but well-built, with thick stone walls and windows that looked out over miles of highland wilderness. The interior was dusty but sound, furnished with the kind of solid, practical pieces that were built to last generations rather than follow fashion trends. More importantly, it felt safe. The wards that protected it hummed with old magic, the kind of protective enchantments that had been laid down by generations of black family witches and wizards who understood the value of having somewhere to retreat when the world became too dangerous. Harry walked through the cottage with the careful attention of someone cataloguing every detail, as if he could not quite believe that he was allowed to be there. "Is this where we live now?" he asked, running his fingers along the surface of a wooden table that was probably older than Sirius himself. "For now," Sirius confirmed. "Until we figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" Harry repeated, as if the concept of having a future that extended beyond immediate survival was foreign to him. "That depends on what you want," Sirius said. "What would you like to happen next?" Harry stared at him with the expression of someone who had never been asked to consider his own preferences about anything important. "I don't know," he admitted. "No one's ever asked me what I wanted before. Well, I'm asking now." Harry walked to the window and stared out at the vast expanse of highland landscape, his small silhouette framed against mountains and sky. "I want to learn about magic," he said finally. "I want to know about my parents. I want to understand why the Dursleys hated me so much." "Those are all things we can do," Sirius assured him. "But first, I think you need to eat properly. You're far too thin." The process of preparing Harry's first real meal was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. The boy watched every step with fascination, as if the simple act of cooking food was some kind of exotic magic. When Sirius handed him a plate piled high with eggs and bacon and toast, Harry stared at it with something approaching disbelief. "This is all for me?" he asked. "All for you," Sirius confirmed. "And there's more if you're still hungry when you finish." Harry ate with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned not to waste food, but also with a growing wonder that seemed to increase with every bite. Halfway through the meal, he looked up at Sirius with tears in his eyes. "It tastes like happiness," he said solemnly. The simple statement nearly undid Sirius completely. He had to turn away and busy himself with unnecessary kitchen tasks to keep from breaking down entirely. When Harry had finished eating, Sirius settled him in front of the fireplace with a cup of hot chocolate and began the process of telling him about his heritage. "Your parents met at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry," Sirius began. "It's a castle in Scotland where young witches and wizards go to learn magic." "Will I go there?" Harry asked, his eyes bright with interest. "Someday, if that's what you want. But there's no rule that says you have to learn magic at school. Some of the most powerful wizards in history were taught by their families." Harry absorbed this information with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. "Will you teach me?" he asked. "I'd be honored to teach you," Sirius replied, "though I should warn you, I was never the most patient student myself. Your father had to help me with my transfiguration essays more times than I care to admit." "What was he like?" Harry asked eagerly. My father? James Potter was the kind of person who made everyone around him feel like they were capable of being better than they actually were. He was brave and funny and absolutely devoted to your mother. He would have done anything to protect you. And my mother? Your mother was brilliant. Not just magically, though she was one of the most talented witches I ever met. She was brilliant at understanding people, at seeing the good in them even when they couldn't see it themselves. She saved my life once, just by believing I was worth saving. Harry listened with rapt attention as Sirius told him stories about James and Lily, about their school days and their friendship and the love that had created him. With each story, the boy seemed to grow a little taller, a little more confident, as if learning about his parents was helping him understand who he was meant to be. When the stories were finished, at least for the moment, Harry curled up beside the fire with a contented sigh. "I like it here," he announced. "I like being with you." "I like being with you too," Sirius replied, and meant it more than he had meant anything in years. That night, Harry slept in a real bed for the first time in his life. Not a mattress on the floor of a cupboard, but an actual bed with clean sheets and pillows, and enough space to stretch out without touching the walls. Sirius sat beside the bed for a long time after Harry had fallen asleep, watching the peaceful expression on the boy's face and marveling at how different he looked when he was not afraid. This was what Harry should have been like all along, safe and fed and loved and free to simply be a child. The fact that it had taken a prison break and kidnapping to achieve something so basic was an indictment of every system that had failed them both. But they were here now. They were together. And for the first time since Godric's Hollow, Sirius Black had something worth fighting for that went beyond simple survival. He had a son to raise. The next morning brought their first real lesson in magic. Harry woke early, as children do when they are excited about new possibilities. He found Sirius in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the kind of domestic efficiency that came from years of having to take care of himself. "Can we do magic today?" Harry asked without preamble, his face bright with anticipation. "We can start with some basic exercises," Sirius agreed. "But magic isn't just about waving a wand around and making things happen. It's about understanding the forces you're working with and learning to control them safely." Harry nodded solemnly, apparently prepared to take magical education as seriously as he took everything else. They started with simple exercises in magical control. Sirius demonstrated how to feel the magic that flowed through everything, how to recognize its presence, and learn to direct it with intention rather than accident. Harry proved to be a remarkably quick student. Within an hour, he was levitating feathers with steady concentration, his small face screwed up with the effort of maintaining focus. "Very good," Sirius praised, watching as Harry guided a feather through a series of precise movements. "You have excellent natural control for someone so young." "Does this mean I'm not broken?" Harry asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "It means you were never broken to begin with," Sirius said firmly. "Magic chooses people, Harry. It doesn't choose people who are fundamentally wrong or damaged. It chooses people who have the capacity to use it well." Harry smiled and returned to his feather levitating with renewed enthusiasm. As the days passed, they fell into a routine that felt more natural than anything Sirius had experienced since his own childhood. Mornings were for lessons in magical theory and basic spell work. Afternoons were for exploring the highland wilderness around the cottage, with Harry learning to identify magical plants and creatures under Sirius's guidance. Evenings were for stories about James and Lily, about the magical world Harry had been born into, about the legacy that was his by right rather than charity. Harry absorbed it all with the desperate hunger of someone who had been starved for knowledge about himself and his place in the world. Every piece of information about his parents, every new magical concept, every demonstration of spell work was treasured and studied and practiced until he had mastered it completely. More importantly, Harry began to smile. Not the careful, measured expressions he had worn at Privet Drive, but genuine smiles that transformed his entire face and revealed glimpses of the confident, happy child he was meant to be. One evening, as they sat by the fire after another day of lessons and exploration, Harry looked up at Sirius with an expression of perfect trust. "Padfoot," he said, using the name he had taken to calling Sirius in private moments. "Yes? When people ask who I belong to, what should I say?" The question caught Sirius off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because of how much the answer meant to him. "You should say that you belong to yourself, first, and to me, second. That you're Harry Potter, son of James and Lily Potter, godson of Sirius Black." Harry considered this for a moment. "What if they ask if you're my father?" Sirius felt his heart constrict with emotions he had not allowed himself to examine too closely. "Do you want me to be?" Harry nodded without hesitation. "Then yes," Sirius said quietly. "If anyone asks, you can tell them I'm your dad." The smile that spread across Harry's face was brighter than any magic Sirius had ever seen. The emergency meeting was called for 6 in the morning, which told everyone present exactly how serious the situation had become. Ministers of magic did not drag department heads from their beds at dawn unless the very foundations of the wizarding world were under threat. Albus Dumbledore arrived at the Ministry of Magic precisely on time, his usually twinkling blue eyes cold with a fury that few people had ever seen and lived to describe. The phoenix feather wand in his hand hummed with barely contained magic, and even the gargoyles that decorated the ministry lifts seemed to shrink away from his presence. Cornelius Fudge was waiting in his office, pacing behind his desk with the frantic energy of a man whose carefully constructed political career was suddenly balanced on a knife's edge. The early morning light streaming through his windows caught the sweat beading on his forehead, despite the November chill. "He's taken the boy," Fudge announced without preamble, his voice pitched higher than usual with barely controlled panic. "Sirius Black has taken Harry Potter." Dumbledore settled into the chair across from Fudge's desk with the deliberate calm of someone whose anger ran too deep for visible expression. "How?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that suggested someone was going to pay dearly for this failure. "We're still investigating the details," Fudge replied, shuffling through a stack of preliminary reports with hands that trembled slightly. "The Dursley family discovered the boy missing this morning. His bedroom door had been unlocked from the outside, and there were no signs of struggle." "His bedroom," Dumbledore repeated, and something in his tone made Fudge pause in his paper shuffling. "The cupboard under the stairs," Fudge clarified, apparently missing the dangerous shift in Dumbledore's demeanor. According to the aunt, the boy had been kept there for his own safety. "For his own safety," Dumbledore echoed, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to be more terrifying than a shout. "Well, yes. The family was concerned about his magical outbursts. Apparently there had been several incidents of accidental magic that had caused significant property damage." "I see." The two words hung in the air between them like an unspoken threat. Fudge, apparently recognizing that he had wandered into dangerous territory, hurried to change the subject. "The point is, Black has him now. A convicted murderer has kidnapped the boy who lived, and we need to find them before this becomes a complete disaster." "Indeed," Dumbledore agreed, though his definition of disaster clearly differed significantly from the minister's. "What measures are being taken?" "I've authorized the largest manhunt in ministry history," Fudge replied, his voice gaining confidence as he moved back to familiar administrative territory. "Every available aura has been assigned to the search. We've contacted the International Confederation to alert foreign ministries. The Dementor guards at Azkaban have been questioned extensively about the escape. And what have you learned?" "That's the disturbing part," Fudge admitted, his confidence evaporating again. "The Dementors claim they never sensed Black's departure. According to them, he simply vanished from his cell sometime during the night shift change." "Impossible," Dumbledore said flatly. "That's what I said. But the guards confirmed it. One moment Black was in his cell, presumably asleep, The next, the cell was empty. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, his brilliant mind already working through possibilities that would not have occurred to lesser wizards. "Sirius Black is an unregistered animagus," he said finally. The statement hit Fudge like a physical blow. "Impossible!" the minister sputtered. "Such information would have been included in his file. The Aura Department is extremely thorough about cataloguing the abilities of dangerous criminals. The Aura Department was not aware of Sirius Black's animagus ability, because it was never officially registered," Dumbledore explained, with the patience of someone talking to a particularly slow child. "It was a skill he acquired during his school years, along with several of his friends. Why wasn't this information provided during his arrest?" "Because I was not consulted during his arrest," Dumbledore replied, and for the first time his voice carried a note of the anger that had been simmering beneath his calm facade. "Mr. Black was taken into custody, tried and sentenced without the benefit of veritaserum, legal representation, or testimony from anyone who actually knew him." Fudge's face went pale as the implications of this statement sank in. "Are you suggesting that Black might be innocent?" "I am suggesting that our justice system failed spectacularly in this case, and that failure has now created a situation far more dangerous than a simple prison break." Before Fudge could respond, the office door burst open to admit a breathless young witch with violently purple hair and a tendency toward clumsiness that had already made her legendary among her Aura colleagues. Nymphadora Tonks skidded to a halt in front of Fudge's desk, her usually cheerful face grim with the weight of whatever news she was carrying. "Minister," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "We've got a problem." "Another problem," Fudge corrected wearily. "What now, Tonks?" "The trace on Potter, sir. It's gone completely dark." "Explain," Dumbledore commanded, his voice sharp with sudden attention. "The Ministry monitors all underage magic, using a combination of location charms and magical signature detection," Tonks explained, her words tumbling over each other in her haste to deliver the information. "Potter's signature has been tracked continuously since his placement with the Dursley family. But as of sometime last night, the monitoring charms simply stopped working." "Stopped working how?" Fudge demanded. "As in they're detecting absolutely nothing, sir. No magical signature, no location data, no indication that Harry Potter still exists anywhere in Britain." "That's impossible," Fudge said automatically, though his voice carried less conviction than it had earlier in the conversation. "Not impossible," Dumbledore said quietly. "Difficult, certainly, but not impossible for someone with Sirius Black's particular combination of skills and knowledge." "What kind of skills?" Tonks asked, her natural curiosity overriding her awareness that she was probably speaking out of turn. "Sirius Black was one of the most naturally gifted students Hogwarts has ever produced," Dumbledore explained. "His understanding of protective enchantments, concealment charms, and counter-surveillance magic was exceptional, even by the standards of his generation. So he could hide Potter indefinitely? If he chose to, yes." The silence that followed this admission was broken only by the sound of Fudge sinking heavily into his chair. "This is a disaster," the minister muttered. "A complete and utter disaster. How am I supposed to explain to the public that we've lost the boy who lived to an escaped convict? Perhaps," Dumbledore suggested with deceptive mildness, "you might begin by explaining how that convict came to be imprisoned without a trial." Fudge's head snapped up, his face flushing red with sudden anger. "That's entirely beside the point," he snapped. "Black was caught red-handed at the scene of a mass murder." The evidence was overwhelming. "Was it?" Dumbledore asked, "because I find myself wondering what evidence could have been so compelling that it eliminated the need for basic legal procedures." The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the office door, followed by the entrance of a tall, imposing witch whose presence immediately commanded respect from everyone in the room. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, surveyed the assembled group with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent her career separating truth from convenient fiction. "Cornelius," she said, nodding curtly to the minister before turning her attention to Dumbledore. "Professor." "Amelia," Dumbledore replied warmly. "I trust you've been briefed on the situation?" "I've been briefed on what we think we know about the situation," Bones replied, her tone suggesting that she had significant doubts about the reliability of their information. "Which is why I'm here." She moved to stand beside Fudge's desk, her manner suggesting that she was taking charge of the conversation, whether the minister liked it or not. "I've been reviewing Sirius Black's case file," she announced. "The original arrest records, the evidence inventory, the witness statements, all of it." "And?" Fudge prompted, though his tone suggested he was not entirely sure he wanted to hear the answer. "And I have serious questions about the thoroughness of the original investigation." "What kind of questions?" Tonks asked, earning a sharp look from Fudge for her continued presumption. "The kind that should have been asked 3 years ago," Bones replied. "For instance, the official record states that Black was apprehended at the scene of Peter Pettigrew's murder, but there's no documentation of anyone actually checking whether Pettigrew was dead." "Of course he was dead," Fudge protested. "They found pieces of him scattered across the street." "They found pieces of someone scattered across the street," Bones corrected. "But without a proper forensic examination, there's no way to confirm the identity of those remains." The silence that followed this observation was deafening. "You're suggesting that Pettigrew might be alive?" Dumbledore asked, though his tone suggested the possibility was not entirely surprising to him. "I'm suggesting that we made assumptions that may have been incorrect," Bones replied carefully. "And those assumptions may have resulted in the imprisonment of an innocent man." "Innocent?" Fudge's voice climbed toward hysteria. "He was their secret keeper. He betrayed the Potters to you-know-who." "Was he?" Bones asked. "Because the only evidence we have for that claim is the testimony of witnesses who weren't present during the actual selection of the secret keeper." Dumbledore was studying his hands with the kind of focused attention that suggested his brilliant mind was working through implications at light speed. "There is another possibility," he said quietly. "One that I should have considered 3 years ago." "What possibility?" multiple voices asked simultaneously. "Peter Pettigrew was also an unregistered animagus." The statement landed in the middle of the room like a curse. His animal form was a rat. Tonks was the first to grasp the implications. "A rat could survive an explosion that would kill a human," she said slowly. "A rat could leave behind human remains while escaping undetected. A rat could hide in plain sight for years without anyone realizing what they were looking at," Bones added grimly. "A rat could have been the one who actually betrayed the Potters while allowing his friend to take the blame," Dumbledore concluded. The office fell silent as everyone present contemplated the magnitude of what they were discussing. "If this is true," Fudge said finally, his voice hollow with the realization of what it would mean for his political career, "then we've made a terrible mistake." "If this is true," Bones corrected sharply, "then we've committed a grave injustice against an innocent man and left a traitor free to continue his crimes for 3 years. And now that innocent man has taken Harry Potter," Tonks pointed out. "Can we really blame him?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Meanwhile, in the Scottish Highlands, Sirius Black was teaching his godson the finer points of magical concealment while completely unaware of the crisis his actions had precipitated in London. He had expected a search, of course. He had even expected it to be thorough and well organized. What he had not expected was his own understanding of ministry procedures to be quite so comprehensive or quite so useful. 3 years in Azkaban had given him plenty of time to think about the mechanisms of magical law enforcement, and his conclusions had not been flattering to the competence of his former captors. The ministry's approach to tracking fugitives relied heavily on magical signatures, location charms, and the assumption that most criminals were neither intelligent enough nor skilled enough to evade detection for extended periods. All of these assumptions were incorrect when applied to Sirius Black. The cottage in the Highlands was more than just hidden. It was layered with generations of black family protective magic that made it effectively invisible to standard detection methods. The wards were old and deep and had been crafted by wizards who understood that sometimes the difference between freedom and imprisonment came down to superior magical preparation. More importantly, Sirius had taken steps to ensure that Harry's magical signature was completely suppressed. "It's not permanent," he explained as he cast the final concealment charm over his godson. "Think of it as magical camouflage. Your magic is still there, still growing, but anyone trying to track you will find nothing to follow." "Does it hurt?" Harry asked, examining his hands as if he expected to see visible changes. "Not at all. You might feel a little different for the first few days, like you're wearing clothes that don't quite fit properly. But your body will adjust." Harry nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the same trust he brought to everything else Sirius taught him. They had been at the cottage for a week now, and the transformation in Harry was already remarkable. Proper food and sleep had begun to fill out his too-thin frame, and the constant fear that had dominated his expressions was gradually being replaced by curiosity and confidence. More importantly, Harry was beginning to understand his own worth. The magical lessons were proceeding better than Sirius had dared hope. Harry possessed the same intuitive grasp of magical theory that had characterized both his parents, combined with a natural control that suggested he would be capable of extraordinary things once he came into his full power. But it was not Harry's magical abilities that impressed Sirius most. It was his resilience, his capacity for joy despite everything he had endured, and his absolute determination to learn everything he could about the world he had been denied. This morning's lesson had focused on defensive magic, basic shields and counter-hexes that every young wizard should know, but which were rarely taught until much later in their education. Harry had mastered the theory in minutes, and was now practicing the wand movements with the focused concentration of someone who understood that knowledge could be the difference between safety and danger. "Very good," Sirius praised, watching as Harry executed a particularly complex shield charm with textbook precision. "Your father would be proud." "Do you think I'll be as good as him someday?" Harry asked, lowering his wand but maintaining his stance. "I think you'll be better," Sirius replied honestly. "You have his natural talent and your mother's discipline. That's a powerful combination." Harry smiled and returned to his practice, apparently determined to prove Sirius right. Later that evening, as they sat by the fire sharing stories about James and Lily, Harry asked the question that Sirius had been dreading. "Padfoot, why didn't Dumbledore come for me?" The question was asked with the careful neutrality that Harry brought to subjects he sensed were complicated, but Sirius could hear the hurt underneath the curiosity. "I don't know," Sirius admitted. "Professor Dumbledore is a very powerful wizard, and he cares about you very much. But sometimes adults make decisions that seem right to them, but feel wrong to everyone else." "Did he know how the Dursleys treated me?" Sirius considered his answer carefully, because this was not a question that could be deflected with platitudes or half-truths. "I think he knew some of it," he said finally. "Whether he understood how bad it really was, I can't say. But he should have checked on you more often than he did." Harry absorbed this with the same thoughtful attention he brought to everything else. "Do you think he'll try to make me go back?" The question struck at the heart of Sirius's deepest fears about their situation. "Over my dead body," he said simply. Harry smiled and settled back against Sirius's shoulder, apparently satisfied with this answer. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the wind outside. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that Sirius had never thought he would experience again. But even as he enjoyed the contentment of having Harry safe and happy beside him, part of his mind was already working through contingencies and escape plans, because he knew that this respite was temporary. Sooner or later, the wizarding world would find them, and when that happened, he would need to be ready to fight for the right to keep the family he had finally found. The only question was whether anyone else would be willing to fight alongside them when the time came. The Marauders' map had been created during their 5th year at Hogwarts, born from equal parts teenage mischief and genuine magical innovation. What had started as a tool for avoiding Filch and the other authority figures who seemed determined to crush their spirits had evolved into something far more sophisticated than its creators had originally intended. Sirius spread the blank parchment across the wooden table in the cottage's main room, his fingers tracing patterns that had been burned into his memory during 7 years of nocturnal adventures. Harry watched with fascination as his godfather drew his wand and spoke the activation phrase that would bring their greatest creation to life. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The map bloomed into existence like a flower opening to sunlight, its intricate network of corridors and rooms spreading across the parchment in delicate ink lines that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry revealed itself in all its architectural impossibility, complete with moving staircases, hidden passages, and the tiny labeled dots that represented every living person within the castle walls. But it was not Hogwarts that interested Sirius today. "This is incredible," Harry breathed, his green eyes wide with wonder as he studied the moving map. "You made this?" "Your father and I made it, along with our 2 best friends," Sirius corrected. "We called ourselves the Marauders. Your father was Prongs, I was Padfoot, and our friends were Moony and Wormtail." The last name came out like a curse, and Harry looked up sharply at the change in Sirius's tone. "Wormtail was Peter Pettigrew," Sirius explained, his voice carefully controlled. "The friend who betrayed your parents to Voldemort. The friend who let me rot in Azkaban while he lived free." Harry absorbed this information with the same grave attention he brought to all revelations about his past. "How does the map work?" he asked, apparently recognizing that dwelling on painful history would not help their current situation. "It tracks magical signatures," Sirius explained, grateful for his godson's instinctive understanding of when to push for information and when to offer distraction. Every witch and wizard has a unique magical fingerprint, as distinctive as their physical appearance. The map was designed to recognize and display these signatures within the boundaries of Hogwarts. "But we're not at Hogwarts," Harry pointed out. "No, but the principles are the same, and more importantly, Peter's magical signature is already programmed into the map's detection system." Sirius began casting a series of complex modification charms, his wand movements precise and controlled as he worked to expand the map's range beyond the castle walls. The magic required was delicate and dangerous, requiring him to essentially reprogram spells that had been cast more than a decade ago without damaging the underlying enchantment structure. Harry watched in silent fascination as his godfather worked, unconsciously absorbing lessons in advanced magical theory that most wizards did not encounter until their 7th year at Hogwarts or beyond. The process took most of the morning, but eventually Sirius succeeded in expanding the map's detection range to cover most of magical Britain. The parchment now showed a rough outline of the British Isles, dotted with thousands of tiny moving points of light that represented the magical population of the country. "Now we hunt," Sirius said grimly, beginning the painstaking process of searching for one particular signature among the multitude. It was tedious work, requiring careful examination of each section of the map while maintaining the complex detection spells that made the search possible. But Sirius had learned patience during his years in Azkaban, and Harry proved to be an unexpectedly helpful assistant once he understood what they were looking for. The breakthrough came just after noon. "There," Harry said suddenly, pointing to a small dot moving through what appeared to be a residential area of London. "That one's moving differently from the others." Sirius looked where his godson was pointing and felt his heart skip a beat. The magical signature was weak and partially concealed, but it was definitely there. More importantly, it was moving with the quick, furtive patterns that suggested someone who was trying very hard not to be noticed, and the name floating above the dot, barely visible in the map's delicate script, read Peter Pettigrew. "Found you," Sirius whispered, his voice carrying 3 years of accumulated rage and determination. "Is that really him?" Harry asked, his young voice tight with excitement and something that might have been fear. "It's really him," Sirius confirmed. "And now we're going to prove to the world that Peter Pettigrew is alive." The hunt for Peter Pettigrew proved to be more complex than Sirius had anticipated. The rat had learned caution during his years in hiding, never staying in one location for more than a day or two, always moving through areas where a small animal would attract no attention. But caution was not the same as cleverness, and Peter had never possessed the marauder's instinctive understanding of how to truly disappear. "He's following a pattern," Sirius explained to Harry as they tracked Pettigrew's movements across London over the course of several days. "He's staying near areas with large rat populations where he can blend in, but he's also seeking out locations where he can access human food and shelter when he needs them." "What kind of locations?" Harry asked, studying the map with the focused attention he brought to all his magical lessons. "Restaurants with outdoor seating," Sirius said, tracing Pettigrew's route with his finger. "Apartment buildings with accessible basements. Markets where dropped food is common. He's a coward, but he's not stupid. He knows how to survive." "How long has he been living like this?" "Since the night your parents died, most likely. 3.5 years of hiding in sewers and garbage bins and anywhere else a rat might go unnoticed." Harry considered this, his expression thoughtful. "That sounds awful," he said finally. "It does, doesn't it?" Sirius agreed. "Almost makes you feel sorry for him." "Almost?" The word hung between them like a promise of justice, delayed, but not denied. Their surveillance of Pettigrew revealed patterns that suggested the traitor was not working alone. His movements, while seemingly random, occasionally converged on specific locations where he would remain stationary for hours at a time before resuming his wandering. "Someone's giving him instructions," Sirius concluded, after a week of careful observation. "He's reporting to someone, probably other Death Eaters who survived the war." "What should we do?" Harry asked. "We gather evidence," Sirius replied. "Photographs, witness statements, anything that can prove Peter Pettigrew is alive and free while an innocent man was imprisoned for his crimes. How do we get photographs of a rat? Very carefully, and with magic designed specifically for that purpose. The surveillance equipment Sirius constructed was a masterpiece of magical engineering, combining traditional wizarding detection charms with innovative modifications that allowed for long-range observation and documentation. The work required advanced transfiguration, complex charms work, and a level of magical theory that pushed even his considerable abilities to their limits. Harry proved to be an eager student in these advanced techniques, his natural magical aptitude allowing him to grasp concepts that should have been far beyond his age level. More importantly, his questions often led Sirius to consider aspects of the problem that might otherwise have been overlooked. "Why don't we just catch him?" Harry asked one evening as they reviewed the day's surveillance data. "If we know where he is, why don't we grab him and make him confess?" "Because grabbing him would make us kidnappers," Sirius explained patiently. "Right now we're the victims of a miscarriage of justice. If we take the law into our own hands, we become criminals regardless of how justified our actions might be. So we have to prove he's alive first. We have to prove he's alive, prove he's been free all this time, and prove that he was the real traitor. Only then can we demand justice through proper channels." Harry absorbed this lesson in the complexities of adult justice with the same serious attention he brought to magical theory. The breakthrough came during their second week of surveillance. Pettigrew, following his established pattern, made his way to a small cafe in Diagon Alley that catered to the kind of wizards who preferred to conduct their business away from prying eyes and official scrutiny. But this time, instead of simply scavenging for dropped food, he transformed. Sirius and Harry watched through their magically enhanced observation device as Peter Pettigrew resumed human form in the alley behind the cafe, his appearance shocking even to someone who had known him for 7 years. Prison had hollowed Sirius out and left him gaunt and desperate-looking. But freedom had not been kind to Peter either. 3 years of living as a rat had left him barely recognizable as human. His skin had a greyish pallor that suggested too little sunlight and too much stress. His hair had thinned to wisps that clung to his scalp like cobwebs. Most disturbing of all, his movements retained the quick, furtive quality of his animal form, even when he was walking upright. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had spent years running from the consequences of his own betrayal. "Now," Sirius whispered, activating the magical camera device they had constructed. "Document everything." The photographs they captured over the next hour would have been sufficient to overturn Sirius's conviction in any reasonable court of law. Peter Pettigrew, supposedly dead for 3 years, meeting with known Death Eater sympathizers in broad daylight. Peter Pettigrew, exchanging information for gold in transactions that could only be interpreted as treasonous. Peter Pettigrew, very much alive and very clearly guilty of everything Sirius had been imprisoned for. But as they prepared to leave their observation post, disaster struck. The detection ward Sirius had established around their position suddenly flared to life, indicating the approach of multiple magical signatures moving with the coordinated precision of law enforcement. "We've been found," Sirius said, his voice grim with the realization that their luck had finally run out. "What do we do?" Harry asked, his young face pale but determined. "We run, and we hope we're faster than they are." The chase that followed tested every skill Sirius had learned during his years as a marauder and his months as a fugitive. The Aurors pursuing them were professional and competent, but they were also operating under the assumption that they were chasing a dangerous criminal rather than hunting someone who understood their methods better than they did themselves. Sirius led Harry through a maze of side streets and hidden passages, using every trick he had ever learned about magical concealment and misdirection. The photographs and surveillance equipment were carefully protected in magically expanded pockets that would survive even a direct stunning spell. Behind them, he could hear the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Shouted orders, the crack of apparition, the distinctive whine of detection charms being cast at maximum power. "They're gaining on us," Harry panted, his shorter legs struggling to keep pace with Sirius's longer stride. "Almost there," Sirius promised, though he was not entirely certain what there was going to turn out to be. The safe house he had prepared for exactly this situation was tucked away in a narrow alley between 2 abandoned buildings in the seedier section of Nocturne Alley. The concealment charms layered over it were subtle but effective, designed to make anyone looking for it suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. They tumbled through the hidden door just as the first stunning spells began flying past their heads. "Safe. For now," Sirius gasped, activating the emergency ward system that would hold off their pursuers for at least a few minutes. Harry collapsed onto a dusty sofa, his chest heaving with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with excitement rather than fear. "That was brilliant," he announced breathlessly, like something out of an adventure story. Sirius stared at his godson in amazement. Most children would have been terrified by what they had just experienced. Harry looked like he had just enjoyed the most exciting day of his life. "You're not scared?" Sirius asked. "Why would I be scared?" Harry replied. "You were with me, and you knew what to do. Besides, we got the photographs, didn't we?" "We got the photographs," Sirius confirmed, pulling the precious evidence from his magically protected pocket. "We have proof that Peter Pettigrew is alive." "So what happens next?" "Next, we figure out how to get this evidence to people who can actually do something about it without getting ourselves killed in the process." Harry nodded solemnly, apparently ready to tackle this challenge with the same determination he had brought to their magical lessons. As they settled in to plan their next move, Sirius found himself marveling at the child his godson had become. 3 weeks ago, Harry had been a frightened, malnourished boy who had never known kindness. Now he was a confident young wizard who faced danger with courage and excitement rather than fear. The Dursleys had tried to break Harry's spirit, but they had failed completely. If anything, their cruelty had forged him into something stronger than he might otherwise have become. James and Lily would have been proud. More importantly, Sirius was proud. Proud of Harry's courage, proud of his magical progress, and proud of the bond they had forged during their weeks together. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. And that, Sirius reflected, made them stronger than any force the wizarding world could bring against them. The evidence they had gathered was damning, but it was also dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could be suppressed or destroyed. In the right hands, it could free an innocent man and expose the corruption that had allowed a traitor to escape justice. The question was, who, in the current climate of fear and political manipulation, could be trusted with the truth? As if summoned by his thoughts, a soft tapping at the window announced the arrival of a familiar, snowy owl. Hedwig perched on the sill, a letter tied to her leg with ribbon that bore the distinctive purple seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Someone wanted to talk. The question was whether that someone could be trusted with the most important evidence either of them would ever possess. The letter that arrived with Hedwig bore the official seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, but the handwriting was unmistakably personal. Sirius recognized it immediately, even after all these years, because some memories were too precious to fade, even under the influence of Dementors. Andromeda Tonks had always possessed the most beautiful penmanship in the Black family, a skill their shared ancestors had considered essential for proper correspondence. What made this letter extraordinary was not its elegant script, but the fact that she had written it at all. The Black family had disowned Andromeda decades ago for the crime of falling in love with a Muggle-born wizard. Her name had been burned from the family tapestry with the same casual cruelty that had been applied to Sirius himself after his own rebellion against pure-blood orthodoxy. For all practical purposes, she had ceased to exist in the eyes of the family that had raised them both. But blood, it seemed, was proving stronger than ideology. "Cousin," the letter began, and Sirius felt something tight in his chest loosen at the simple acknowledgement of kinship. "I have been following recent events with great interest and growing concern. If you are willing to trust someone who has spent the last 20 years pretending you don't exist, I believe we should talk." The letter went on to provide details of a meeting place and time, along with assurances that she would come alone and unarmed. More importantly, it contained information that suggested she had access to official channels within the ministry, and that those channels were beginning to carry whispers of doubt about the case that had sent Sirius to Azkaban. "There are people asking questions," she wrote. "Important people, with the authority to demand answers. The official narrative is beginning to crack, and when it falls, you'll want allies who can help you land safely." Harry read the letter over Sirius's shoulder, his green eyes bright with curiosity and something that might have been hope. "Is she really your cousin?" he asked. "She's really my cousin," Sirius confirmed. "One of the few members of my family worth knowing, though I haven't seen her in almost 15 years. Why not? Because she married a man our family considered beneath her station, and they punished her for choosing love over blood purity. She lost everything for that choice, but she's never regretted it." Harry absorbed this information with the thoughtful attention he brought to all family history. "Do you think we can trust her?" "I think she's the only family member who ever stood up to the others when they were being cruel," Sirius replied. "If anyone deserves a chance to prove themselves, it's Andromeda." The meeting was arranged for the following evening, in a small tea shop in Diagon Alley that catered to witches who preferred quiet conversation to theatrical displays of magical prowess. Sirius arrived early, concealed under a disillusionment charm that rendered him effectively invisible to casual observation. Andromeda Tonks entered the shop precisely on time, her bearing carrying the unmistakable elegance of black family breeding, tempered by 20 years of living in the real world. She had inherited the classical features that ran in their bloodline, but her face had been softened by laughter and kindness in ways that the portraits of their ancestors had never achieved. More importantly, she radiated the kind of calm competence that suggested she could be trusted with dangerous secrets. She chose a table in the corner, ordered tea with the casual efficiency of someone accustomed to taking care of practical details, and waited. Her posture was relaxed but alert, the stance of someone who had learned to be prepared for trouble without advertising the fact. Sirius dropped his concealment charm and slid into the seat across from her, watching her face carefully for any sign of shock or fear. Instead, she smiled. "Hello, Sirius," she said warmly, as if 3 years in Azkaban and a month as a fugitive were minor inconveniences rather than life-altering catastrophes. "You look like hell, but you look free, which is an improvement." "Hello, Andromeda," he replied, feeling some of the tension he had been carrying for weeks begin to ease. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for trusting me enough to respond to my letter. I wasn't entirely certain you would." She poured tea for both of them, with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to find comfort in small rituals, then settled back to study his face with the keen attention of someone trained to read people accurately. "You didn't kill Peter Pettigrew," she said, without preamble. "No, I didn't." "You didn't betray James and Lily Potter to Voldemort." "No, I didn't do that either." "And you've spent 3 years in Azkaban for crimes you didn't commit, while the real traitor lived free." "That's correct." She nodded, as if this confirmation of what she had already suspected was somehow satisfying. "I've been reviewing your case file," she continued. "Officially, as part of a broader investigation into potential miscarriages of justice during the war years. What I found was disturbing. How disturbing? Disturbing enough that I've been losing sleep, wondering how many other innocent people are rotting in Azkaban because we were too frightened and too eager for convenient answers to bother with proper procedures." Sirius leaned forward, his attention sharpening. "What did you find?" "No trial, which you already knew. No veritaserum, which should have been standard protocol. No proper forensic examination of the alleged crime scene. No witness interviews beyond the initial statements taken in the immediate aftermath of the explosion. The list of procedural failures was damning, but Sirius had suspected most of it already. "More importantly," she continued, "I found evidence that key witnesses were never consulted. People who could have provided crucial information about the timeline of events, the relationships between the involved parties, and the circumstances surrounding the selection of the secret keeper." "What kind of witnesses?" "Remus Lupin, for one. As one of your closest friends, his testimony about your character and your relationship with Pettigrew should have been considered essential. Instead, he was never even contacted." The mention of Remus sent a pang of loss through Sirius that had nothing to do with his current circumstances and everything to do with friendships that had been destroyed by suspicion and fear. "Remus believed I was guilty," Sirius said quietly. "He thought I had betrayed James and Lily." "Did he?" Andromeda asked. "Or did he simply accept the official version of events because no one ever gave him the opportunity to examine the evidence for himself?" Before Sirius could respond, the tea shop door opened to admit a young woman whose violently purple hair immediately identified her as someone comfortable with magical self-expression. Nymphadora Tonks moved through the crowded shop with the casual confidence of someone who belonged wherever she chose to be. But her eyes were alert and scanning in ways that suggested professional training rather than natural curiosity. She spotted her mother immediately and made her way over to their corner table, with a gait that was only slightly less graceful than it appeared. "Watcher?" "Mum," she said cheerfully, settling into the remaining chair with an ease that suggested this kind of clandestine meeting was not entirely unusual in the Tonks family. "Nymphadora," Andromeda replied with the long-suffering tone of a mother whose daughter had never quite learned the value of discretion. I thought we agreed you would wait outside. Yeah, well, I thought we agreed that I'm a qualified aura who knows how to handle herself in potentially dangerous situations, Tonks replied, extending her hand to Sirius with a grin that transformed her entire face. Watcher, cousin, I'm Tonks, and before you ask, yes, I've been assigned to hunt you down and drag you back to Azkaban. Awkward, innit? The casual way she acknowledged the conflict between family loyalty and professional duty was so characteristically black that Sirius found himself smiling despite their circumstances. Awkward is one word for it, he agreed, shaking her hand. Though I have to admit, being hunted by family is somehow less insulting than being hunted by strangers. Oh, I'm not hunting you anymore, Tonks clarified cheerfully. Officially, I lost your trail days ago and have no idea where you might be hiding. Unofficially, I've been reading your case file and asking uncomfortable questions about why an innocent man spent 3 years in prison. You think I'm innocent? I think the evidence against you was circumstantial at best and that the investigation was a joke, Tonks replied bluntly. More importantly, I think whoever really betrayed the Potters is still out there, probably laughing at how cleverly they framed you for their crimes. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their tea, which gave Sirius time to process the implications of what he was hearing. If Tonks was representing the views of other auras, then the cracks in the official narrative were wider than he had dared hope. What kind of uncomfortable questions have you been asking? He inquired once their server had departed. The kind that get you called into your supervisor's office for lectures about departmental loyalty and the importance of not undermining public confidence in the justice system, Tonks replied with a grimace. Apparently, suggesting that we might have imprisoned the wrong person is considered bad for morale. But you're still asking them. Someone has to. And frankly, the more resistance I encounter, the more convinced I become that we're covering up a massive mistake. Andromeda leaned forward, her expression growing serious. Which brings us to why we're here, she said. Nymphadora has been keeping me informed about the official investigation, and I've been doing some investigating of my own through unofficial channels. Between us, we've uncovered information that could be crucial to clearing your name. What kind of information? Sirius asked. Evidence that Peter Pettigrew has been seen alive, Andromeda replied quietly. Multiple sightings over the past 3 years, all dismissed by the Ministry as cases of mistaken identity or wishful thinking. Sirius felt his heart rate accelerate. Where? London, mostly. Always in rat form, always in areas where a small animal would attract no attention. But the magical signatures are consistent, and the behavioral patterns match what we know about unregistered animagi trying to avoid detection. Sirius noted. My husband Ted has been helping with the research, Andromeda explained. He may be Muggle-born, but he understands magical law better than most wizards. He's the one who identified the legal precedents that could be used to demand a proper trial. And I've been documenting every procedural irregularity in your case, Tonks added. Building a file that could be used to challenge your conviction if we can find enough evidence of systemic failure. The casual way they discussed overturning his conviction, as if it were a technical problem to be solved rather than an impossible dream, left Sirius momentarily speechless. Why? He asked finally. Why are you doing this? Because your family, Andromeda replied simply. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and because someone needs to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Plus, Tonks added with a grin, I really hate being lied to by my own department. Makes me feel like a fool, and I don't like feeling like a fool. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front of the tea shop. Sirius tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his wand, but Tonks held up a restraining hand. Just a customer having trouble with the door, she said, after a moment of careful observation. But we should probably wrap this up soon. The longer we stay in one place, the higher the chance of unwanted attention. Agreed, Andromeda said. Sirius, we want to help you, but we need to know what resources you have available and what your plans are for moving forward. Sirius considered his options carefully. Trusting them meant revealing information that could be used against him if they were discovered, or if their loyalty proved to be less solid than it appeared. But it also meant the possibility of finally having allies in his fight to clear his name. I have evidence, he said finally. Photographs of Peter Pettigrew alive and free, meeting with known Death Eater sympathizers. Documentation of his activities over the past several weeks, enough to prove he's been alive all this time. Both women leaned forward, their attention sharpening. What kind of evidence? Tonks asked. The kind that could get us all killed if it falls into the wrong hands, Sirius replied, but also the kind that could free an innocent man and expose a traitor who's been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. We'll need to examine it, Andromeda said. Verify its authenticity and determine how best to present it to the authorities. What authorities? Sirius asked skeptically. The same ones who threw me in prison without a trial? Amelia Bones, Tonks said immediately. Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She's honest, competent, and powerful enough to demand a proper investigation if the evidence warrants it. Can she be trusted? She's the only person in the ministry I trust completely, Tonks replied. If anyone can see justice done, it's her. Sirius considered this, weighing risks against opportunities. I'll need guarantees, he said finally. Protection for Harry, immunity from prosecution for any actions I've taken as a fugitive, and assurance that this evidence won't simply disappear into some ministry vault. Harry? Andromeda asked, her expression shifting to concern. Harry Potter? My godson, Sirius confirmed. He's been with me since I took him from the Dursleys. He's safe and well cared for, but I won't put him at risk for the sake of my own vindication. The two women exchanged glances that spoke volumes about family loyalty, and the lengths parents would go to protect their children. We'll make sure he's protected, Andromeda promised. Whatever happens, Harry Potter will be safe. And if the evidence is as compelling as you suggest, Tonks added, you'll have more allies than you realize. There are people in the ministry who've been waiting for an excuse to reopen cases from the war years. You might be surprised by how much support you have once the truth comes out. For the first time since his escape from Azkaban, Sirius felt something that might have been hope. The meeting concluded with arrangements for future contact and preliminary plans for presenting the evidence to Amelia Bones. As they prepared to leave, Andromeda placed a gentle hand on Sirius's arm. James and Lily would be proud of how you've protected Harry, she said quietly. And they would be proud of the man you've become despite everything that's been done to you. The words hit Sirius harder than any curse could have, because they carried the weight of forgiveness he had never thought he deserved. As he watched his cousins disappear into the crowd of Diagon Alley shoppers, Sirius felt the burden of isolation that had defined his adult life beginning to lift. He was no longer alone in his fight for justice. More importantly, Harry was no longer alone in the world. They had family now, family who would stand with them against whatever challenges lay ahead. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt like enough. The Potter ancestral home had been hidden for so long that even the magical maps of Britain had forgotten its existence. Tucked away in the Cotswolds behind layers of protective enchantments that made the Fidelius charm look like a parlour trick, Godric's Rest had served as the seat of Potter family power for more than 8 centuries. Sirius had visited the estate only once during his school years, when James had brought him home for Christmas during their 6th year. The experience had been revelatory, not just because of the sheer scope of Potter family wealth and influence, but because of the casual way James had dismissed it all as unimportant compared to friendship and love. Now standing before the wrought iron gates that bore the Potter coat of arms, Sirius felt the weight of history and responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Harry stared up at the imposing manor house beyond the gates, his green eyes wide with wonder and something that might have been recognition. "It looks familiar," he said quietly, "like something from a dream I can't quite remember." "Your parents brought you here when you were very small," Sirius explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Before Voldemort, before everything went wrong. This was supposed to be your inheritance, Harry. This was supposed to be your home." The gates recognized Harry's magical signature immediately, swinging open with the silent efficiency of mechanisms that had been waiting patiently for the return of their rightful master. The gravel drive stretched ahead of them through parkland that had been maintained by house elves for decades, despite the absence of any human inhabitants. Godric's Rest itself was a masterpiece of magical architecture, its ancient stones humming with power that had been accumulated and refined by generations of Potter family wizards. The building seemed to exist in more dimensions than strictly necessary, its rooms and corridors folding in on themselves in ways that maximized both space and defensive capability. More importantly, it radiated the kind of warm welcome that suggested it had been waiting for Harry to come home. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a house elf so ancient that his ears had gone completely white, and his face was mapped with wrinkles that spoke of centuries of faithful service. "Master Harry Potter," the elf said, his voice cracking with emotion as he bowed so low his nose nearly touched the floor. "Dobby has been waiting. Oh, such a long wait it has been. But Master Harry has come home at last." Harry looked uncertainly at Sirius, clearly unsure of the proper protocol for interacting with magical servants. "This is Dobby," Sirius explained gently. "He served your family for many years, and he's been taking care of this place since your parents died. Dobby, this is Harry, and I'm Sirius Black, James's friend." "Master Sirius Black," Dobby said, straightening up enough to study Sirius with eyes that held surprising intelligence. "Dobby remembers Master Sirius. Master James spoke of Master Sirius often. Master James said Master Sirius was to be trusted with anything, even with Master Harry's life." The casual reference to conversations from years past hit Sirius like a physical blow, because it confirmed what he had always suspected, but never quite dared to believe. James had trusted him completely, even with his most precious treasure. "We need access to the family records," Sirius said, his voice steady, despite the emotional turmoil churning beneath the surface. "Legal documents, magical inheritance papers, anything that might help us understand Harry's true legacy." Dobby's ancient face lit up with something approaching joy. "Oh yes, Master Sirius. Dobby has been keeping everything safe, just as Master James instructed. The library, the vault, the special rooms where Master James kept his most important things. All safe, all waiting for Master Harry to claim his inheritance." They followed the house elf through corridors lined with portraits of Harry's ancestors, each painting acknowledging their passage with nods and murmured greetings that spoke of recognition and approval. The Potter family had always been known for their progressive politics and their willingness to stand against dark wizards, and their painted representatives seemed pleased to see their bloodline continuing in Harry. The library was a testament to centuries of accumulated magical knowledge, its shelves stretching from floor to ceiling and filled with books that represented the cutting edge of magical research from every era. Ancient grimoires bound in dragon hide sat beside modern treatises on theoretical magic, while scrolls written in languages that predated recorded history shared shelf space with contemporary journals from magical universities around the world. But it was not the books that drew Sirius's attention. It was the vault built into the library's far wall, its door bearing the kind of complex warding schemes that suggested the contents were both valuable and dangerous. "Master James sealed the vault before the last battle," Dobby explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Master James said that if anything happened to him and Mistress Lily, Master Harry would need the things inside to protect himself from the dark wizards who would come for him. "What kind of things?" Harry asked, his young voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Family magic," Sirius replied, studying the ward structure with growing amazement. "Your father sealed this vault with protections that would make Gringotts look like a piggy bank. Whatever he put in there, he wanted to make absolutely certain it would wait for you and only you. The process of opening the vault required Harry to provide multiple forms of identification, from blood samples to magical signature scans to memories of his parents that only he could possess. The safeguards were so extensive that Sirius began to wonder what exactly James had hidden behind them. When the massive door finally swung open, the answer took his breath away. The vault contained the accumulated magical legacy of 8 centuries of Potter family wizards. Ancient wands carved from wood that no longer existed. Spellbooks written by family members who had pushed the boundaries of magical theory into uncharted territory. Artifacts of power that had been passed down through generations of Potter patriarchs, each adding to the collection for the benefit of their descendants. More importantly, it contained James and Lily's true will. Sirius lifted the parchment from its place of honor on a pedestal at the center of the vault, his hands trembling slightly as he recognized both James's bold handwriting and Lily's precise script. "We, James Potter and Lily Potter, née Evans, being of sound mind and magical capacity, do hereby set forth our final wishes regarding the care of our son, Harry James Potter, and the disposition of our worldly goods." The document began. What followed was a comprehensive legal document that left no doubt about James and Lily's intentions for their son's upbringing. "In the event of our deaths, we name Sirius Black as Harry's guardian and magical mentor, with full authority to make decisions regarding his education, magical training, and general welfare. We reject absolutely any attempt to place Harry with Lily's sister, Petunia Dursley, as we have observed her hostility toward the magical world and believe she would be actively harmful to Harry's development as both a wizard and a human being." The words hit Sirius like a stunning spell, because they made it clear that everything Dumbledore had done was in direct contradiction to his parents' explicit wishes. Furthermore, we grant Sirius Black full access to the Potter family magical inheritance, including all books, artifacts, and training materials necessary to provide Harry with an education appropriate to his heritage and magical potential. We trust Sirius to ensure that Harry understands not just his power, but his responsibility to use that power in defense of those who cannot protect themselves. Harry read over Sirius's shoulder, his face cycling through confusion, wonder, and something that might have been anger. "They didn't want me to go to the Dursleys," he said quietly. "They specifically forbade it," Sirius confirmed, his voice tight with rage at the casual way their wishes had been ignored. "They wanted you raised by someone who understood magic, someone who could teach you about your heritage and help you develop your abilities safely." "So why did I end up in that cupboard?" "Because Albus Dumbledore decided he knew better than your parents what was good for you. The bitter truth of it hung between them like a curse. They spent the rest of the day exploring the vault's contents, with Dobby serving as guide and historian for artifacts whose significance had been forgotten by everyone except the house elves who had maintained them through the centuries." Harry proved to have an intuitive understanding of Potter family magic that went far beyond anything Sirius had expected. Ancient wands responded to his touch with eager warmth, as if recognizing their rightful master after years of dormancy. Spell books opened themselves to chapters that contained exactly the information he needed, as if the accumulated knowledge of his ancestors was actively seeking to educate him. Most remarkably, Harry displayed a natural affinity for the defensive magic that had been the Potter family specialty for generations. "Your ancestors were known throughout the magical world as protectors," Sirius explained, as Harry effortlessly cast shield charms that should have been far beyond his current skill level. "They specialized in magic designed to defend the innocent and defeat dark wizards. It's in your blood, Harry. This is what you were born to do." Is this why Voldemort wanted to kill me? Harry asked, his young face serious with concentration as he practiced advanced protective wards. Partly, Sirius replied carefully. There was a prophecy that suggested you would have the power to defeat him, but I think he would have targeted your family regardless, because the Potters have always stood against everything he represented. Harry absorbed this information with the same thoughtful attention he brought to all discussions of his destiny. Will I be strong enough? He asked quietly. When I'm older, I mean. Will I be strong enough to fight him if he comes back? You'll be stronger than he could ever imagine, Sirius assured him. Not just because of your magical power, though that will be considerable, but because you'll have something he never understood and never possessed. What's that? People who love you, people who believe in you, and the knowledge that you're fighting for something worth protecting rather than something worth destroying. They worked through the evening, with Harry absorbing magical techniques and theoretical knowledge at a rate that defied everything Sirius thought he knew about childhood education. By the time they retired to bedrooms that had been prepared for them by house elves who seemed overjoyed to have family and residence again, Harry had mastered defensive magic that most adult wizards would have found challenging. More importantly, he had begun to understand his place in the larger struggle between light and darkness that had defined the wizarding world for generations. The next morning brought revelations that put their discoveries in the vault into a broader and more disturbing context. Dobby appeared at breakfast with a stack of newspapers that had been delivered by Owl, his ancient face grim with concern. Master Sirius should see the news, the house elf announced, spreading the papers across the breakfast table with hands that trembled slightly. The headlines were uniformly alarming. Potter kidnapping sparks, ministry crisis, search for missing boy who lived enters third week. Questions raised about Black's original conviction. But it was the smaller articles, buried on interior pages, that caught Sirius's attention. Stories about other prisoners whose cases were being reviewed, reports of procedural irregularities in wartime trials, hints that the ministry's rush to justice in the aftermath of Voldemort's defeat had resulted in more miscarriages of justice than anyone wanted to admit. The wizarding world was beginning to question everything they thought they knew about the war and its aftermath. They're starting to doubt, Sirius murmured, scanning through article after article that painted an increasingly unflattering picture of ministry competence and integrity. Is that good or bad? Harry asked, looking up from his own perusal of the papers. It's complicated, Sirius replied. Doubt could lead to justice for people who deserve it, but it could also lead to chaos if people lose faith in the institutions that are supposed to protect them. What do? We prepare for whatever comes next, Sirius said grimly, and we make sure you're ready for the role you're going to have to play in all of this. What role? The role of Harry Potter, heir to one of the most powerful magical families in Britain, target of the darkest wizard in recent memory, and symbol of hope for everyone who believes that good can triumph over evil. Harry considered this weighty description of his destiny with the same serious attention he brought to magical theory. That sounds like a lot of responsibility for someone who's only 5 years old, he pointed out with the kind of practical wisdom that reminded Sirius forcibly of Lily. It is a lot of responsibility, Sirius agreed. But you won't be carrying it alone. And you won't be carrying it until you're ready. How will I know when I'm ready? Because you'll have learned everything your family's magic can teach you. Because you'll have allies who believe in you. And because you'll understand that being powerful means nothing if you don't use that power to protect people who can't protect themselves. Harry nodded solemnly, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Can we learn more today? He asked eagerly. About the family magic, I mean? We can learn as much as you can absorb, Sirius promised. But first, we need to decide what we're going to do about the world outside these walls, because eventually we're going to have to face them all. The ministry, the press, Dumbledore, and everyone else who thinks they know what's best for Harry Potter. Will they try to take me away from you?" "They'll try," Sirius said grimly. "But they'll have to get through centuries of Potter family protective magic to do it. And somehow, I don't think your ancestors would approve of anyone who tried to separate you from the family that actually wants you." As if summoned by his words, the portraits lining the breakfast room began murmuring among themselves in voices that carried unmistakable approval and determination. Harry Potter had come home, at last, and his family had no intention of letting anyone take him away again. The intelligence network that Andromeda and Tonks had assembled operated with the kind of efficiency that could only come from righteous anger, combined with professional competence. Within days of their alliance being formalized, reports began flowing in from sources throughout magical Britain, each piece of information adding another thread to the web they were weaving around Peter Pettigrew. The pattern that emerged was both disturbing and illuminating. Pettigrew had not simply been hiding during his years of supposed death. He had been active, moving through the magical underworld like a virus, spreading information and maintaining connections with surviving Death Eater sympathizers who had escaped justice in the chaos following Voldemort's fall. More disturbingly, he appeared to be building toward something. The safe house where Sirius and Harry had taken refuge after their narrow escape from the Auras was a testament to Black family paranoia and magical engineering. Located beneath a defunct potion shop in Nocturne Alley, it had been constructed during the height of Grindelwald's War as a place where family members could hide if the political situation in Britain became untenable. The irony that Sirius was now using his ancestors' preparations against dark wizards to hide from his own government was not lost on him. Harry had adapted to their underground existence with the resilience that seemed to characterize everything he did. The boy who had once been confined to a cupboard under the stairs appeared to find their current accommodation positively luxurious by comparison. Though Sirius suspected this said more about the Dursleys' cruelty than it did about the objective comfort of hiding in a cellar. More importantly, Harry's magical education was proceeding at a pace that would have been remarkable in a child twice his age. The combination of Potter family magical inheritance and proper instruction was producing results that bordered on the extraordinary. This morning's lesson focused on advanced detection and tracking magic, skills that Sirius hoped they would never need, but which recent experience suggested might be essential for survival. "Remember, Harry, magic is not just about power," Sirius explained, as his godson practiced casting subtle detection charms. "It's about precision, timing, and understanding. A wizard who can cast a perfect shield charm will always defeat someone who relies on brute force alone." Harry nodded seriously, his small face scrunched in concentration as he attempted to identify the magical signatures of various objects Sirius had hidden around their makeshift training area. "I can feel them," Harry said quietly, his eyes closed as he extended his magical senses. "There's something behind the bookshelf that feels cold and dark, and something in the corner that feels warm and happy." The accuracy of his descriptions sent a chill through Sirius, because it suggested that Harry possessed the kind of natural magical sensitivity that appeared perhaps once in a generation. The ability to sense the emotional resonance of magical objects was not something that could be taught. It was a gift that either existed or it didn't. "Very good," Sirius praised, though his voice carried undertones of concern that he hoped Harry was too young to recognize. "What else can you sense?" Harry's expression suddenly shifted from concentration to alarm. "Someone's coming," he whispered urgently. "Someone who feels angry and scared and determined. The wards around their hiding place were among the most sophisticated that Black family magic could devise, designed to provide early warning of any approach by potentially hostile forces. But Harry had detected the intruder several seconds before the official alarms began to sound. "How many?" Sirius asked, drawing his wand while simultaneously casting concealment charms over their training materials. "Just one," Harry replied, his voice steady despite the obvious danger. "But they feel very powerful. The footsteps on the stairs leading down to their refuge were careful but confident, suggesting someone who knew exactly where they were going and was not particularly concerned about walking into a trap. When the concealed door opened to reveal Remus Lupin, Sirius felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension that had nothing to do with immediate physical danger. His oldest surviving friend looked terrible. 3 years of believing that Sirius had betrayed James and Lily had taken a visible toll, carving lines of grief and guilt into a face that had already been marked by lycanthropy and poverty. His robes were patched and shabby, his hair prematurely grey, and his eyes held the haunted quality of someone who had been carrying unbearable guilt for far too long. "Hello, Sirius," Remus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years of accumulated pain and regret. "Hello, Moony," Sirius replied, using the old nickname automatically, despite the tension crackling between them. "I have to say, your timing is either very good or very bad, depending on your intentions." "My intentions are complicated," Remus admitted, his gaze shifting to Harry with an expression of wonder and something that might have been recognition. "Hello, Harry. You look very much like your father, but you have your mother's eyes." Harry studied the newcomer with the careful attention he brought to all potentially dangerous situations. "Are you here to take me back to the Dursleys?" he asked, with a directness that was both childlike and unnervingly mature. "No," Remus replied firmly. "I'm here because I've spent 3 years believing something that I should have questioned from the beginning, and because recent evidence suggests that everything I thought I knew about your parents' death was wrong." "What kind of evidence?" Sirius asked, though he kept his wand ready and his position between Remus and Harry. "The kind that's been staring me in the face for years, but which I was too devastated to see clearly," Remus replied with bitter self-recrimination. "Andromeda Tonks contacted me 2 days ago. She asked me questions about the night James and Lily died, about Peter's behavior in the weeks leading up to their murder, about things I should have told the Aurors but was never asked about, such as the fact that Peter had been acting strangely for months before the attack, nervous, jumpy, asking odd questions about protective magic and the whereabouts of Order members. I thought it was just fear, but looking back with clearer eyes, it was obviously guilt. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession." "I should have seen it," Remus continued, his voice thick with self-loathing. "I should have questioned why you would betray James and Lily, when anyone who knew you understood that you loved them like family. I should have demanded a proper trial, demanded to give testimony about your character. I should have done something other than simply accept that my best friend had become a murderer." "You thought I was guilty," Sirius said quietly. "For 3 years you believed I had betrayed James and Lily. For 3 years I was a coward who found it easier to believe a comfortable lie than to fight for an uncomfortable truth," Remus corrected. "And now an innocent man has spent 3 years in hell while the real traitor lived free, and a child has been raised by people who should never have been allowed near him." Harry had been following this conversation with the intense focus he brought to all adult discussions that might affect his future. "Does this mean you believe Sirius is innocent?" he asked Remus directly. "I believe that Sirius Black would die before betraying James and Lily Potter," Remus replied without hesitation. "I should have said that 3 years ago, and my failure to do so is something I'll regret for the rest of my life." The simple statement of faith, coming after years of doubt and abandonment, hit Sirius harder than any curse could have. He felt his careful emotional control beginning to crack under the weight of vindication he had never dared hope for. "Moony," he began, but Remus held up a hand to stop him. "Before you say anything, there's something else you need to know. Peter is not just alive and hiding. He's been busy." "Busy how?" Sirius asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Gathering information, maintaining contacts, preparing for something. Andromeda's people have been tracking his movements, and the pattern suggests he's been working toward a specific goal rather than simply trying to survive. What kind of goal? The kind that involves bringing back his master. The words sent ice through Sirius's veins, because they confirmed his worst fears about what Pettigrew's continued freedom might mean. "Voldemort is dead," Harry said, with the confidence of a child who had been told this fact repeatedly and had no reason to doubt it. "Voldemort's body is dead," Remus corrected gently. But Tom Riddle had spent decades preparing for the possibility of physical death. There are ways to return, if someone is willing to pay the price for bringing him back. "Someone like Peter?" Sirius asked grimly. Someone exactly like Peter. Desperate, guilty, terrified of what will happen if his betrayal is exposed, and completely dependent on Voldemort's protection for his continued survival. The implications of this revelation hung over them like a storm cloud. If Pettigrew was working to resurrect Voldemort, then every day he remained free brought them closer to a catastrophe that would make the First War look like a minor skirmish. "We have to stop him," Harry said, with the kind of calm determination that should have been impossible in someone so young. "We have to find him first," Sirius replied, "and based on what Andromeda told us, he's become very good at staying hidden." "Not as good as he thinks," Remus said with a grim smile. "I spent 7 years learning his habits, his fears, his weaknesses. I know how Peter thinks when he's scared, and right now he should be terrified. Why? Because the Ministry is finally starting to ask the right questions about your case. Because there are people with real authority who are demanding answers about why you were never given a trial. Because his comfortable life in the shadows is about to become very uncomfortable indeed." The hunt for Peter Pettigrew began that very night. Armed with Remus's insights into their quarry's psychology and Sirius's comprehensive knowledge of detection magic, they began a systematic search of London's magical underworld. The modified Marauder's map provided general location data, but tracking someone who could transform into a rat required more specialized techniques. Harry proved to be invaluable in this effort, his natural magical sensitivity allowing him to distinguish between normal rats and one particular rat whose magical signature carried the distinctive traces of human transfiguration. "There," Harry whispered, pointing toward a cluster of rubbish bins behind a dingy pub in the seediest section of Diagon Alley. "He's been there recently. I can feel the wrongness he leaves behind." The wrongness was an apt description, Sirius realized. Peter's years of guilt and betrayal had corrupted his magical signature in ways that were detectable to anyone with sufficient sensitivity to magical resonance. They tracked him through the narrow alleys and hidden passages of magical London, following a trail of corrupted magic and desperate fear that painted a clear picture of a man running out of options. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not at all what Sirius had expected. They cornered Peter in an abandoned warehouse in the Magical District's industrial section, a building that had been used for potion ingredient storage before the war, and which now served as a meeting place for the kind of wizards who preferred to conduct their business away from official scrutiny. Peter emerged from his rat form with the desperate resignation of someone who had always known this moment would come eventually. "Hello, Sirius," he said, his voice carrying none of the warmth that had once characterized their friendship. "Remus. I was wondering when you'd find me." He looked even worse than the surveillance photographs had suggested. 3 years of living in constant fear had aged him decades, turning him into a prematurely old man whose eyes darted constantly toward potential escape routes. More disturbing was the presence of the 3 wizards who stepped out of the shadows behind him. Death Eaters, unmistakably, their faces bearing the kind of casual cruelty that had characterized Voldemort's followers during the war. "Peter, you don't have to do this," Remus said, his voice carrying genuine sadness for what their friendship had become. "It's not too late to do the right thing, isn't it?" Peter replied with a bitter laugh. "Do you think confessing will bring James and Lily back? Do you think it will undo 3 years of Sirius rotting in Azkaban? Do you think the wizarding world will forgive the man who betrayed the Potters to the Dark Lord? They might, if you help us stop what you're planning, Sirius said, though his wand remained trained on the Death Eaters rather than his former friend. What I'm planning is survival, Peter snapped. What I'm planning is making sure that when the Dark Lord returns, I'm on the right side of his favor rather than his wrath, the casual confirmation that they were indeed working toward Voldemort's resurrection sent Harry into action. The boy who had spent weeks learning defensive magic and Potter family battle techniques moved with a speed and precision that caught everyone present completely off guard. His shield charm deflected the first curse sent in their direction, while his disarming hex removed the wand from the nearest Death Eater's hand before the man could complete his second spell. More importantly, Harry's magical signature suddenly flared with power that seemed far too great for his small body to contain. The Death Eaters, apparently recognizing exactly who they were facing, shifted their target from Sirius to the 5-year-old boy who was supposed to have been their master's greatest enemy. That proved to be a fatal mistake. The protective magic that Lily's sacrifice had woven into Harry's very being reacted to the presence of Voldemort's followers with explosive force. The warehouse filled with golden light that sent the Death Eaters staggering backward, their faces contorted in agony as ancient magic rejected their presence with absolute finality. Harry, meanwhile, stood in the center of the magical storm with perfect calm, his green eyes blazing with power that seemed to draw from depths no one had suspected he possessed. "You can't hurt me," he told the Death Eaters with the quiet confidence of someone stating an obvious fact. "You can't hurt anyone I care about." That's not how the magic works. Peter, staring at this display of power with obvious terror, made the mistake of trying to transform back into his rat form. Harry's binding hex caught him mid-transformation, leaving him trapped in a grotesquely half-human state that made it impossible to complete the change or return to human form. "No more running," Harry said firmly. "No more hiding. It's time to tell the truth. The battle, such as it was, ended with the Death Eaters fleeing in terror and Peter Pettigrew finally captured after 3 years of freedom. But as they prepared to deliver their prisoner to the authorities, Sirius found himself staring at his godson with a mixture of pride and concern that had nothing to do with their immediate success. Harry Potter had just demonstrated magical power that most adult wizards could never hope to match. The question was, what did that mean for the future they were all trying to build? The emergency session of the Wizengamot had been called with the kind of urgency typically reserved for declarations of war or the discovery of dragon infestations in populated areas. The ancient chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic hummed with tension as witches and wizards who rarely agreed on anything found themselves united in their collective horror at what the evidence presented to them might mean for the stability of their entire judicial system. Amelia Bones stood at the center of the chamber, her authoritative presence commanding attention from even the most senior members of the magical government. The documents spread across the presentation table before her represented weeks of meticulous investigation, cross-referencing and verification. More importantly, they represented the complete collapse of everything the wizarding world thought it knew about one of the most significant criminal cases in recent memory. "Members of the Wizengamot," she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute professional certainty. "We are gathered here today to address evidence that suggests a grave miscarriage of justice may have occurred in the case of Sirius Black." The murmur that ran through the assembled officials was like the sound of a building beginning to collapse under its own weight. Cornelius Fudge sat in the minister's chair with the expression of a man watching his political career crumble in real time. His face had gone pale beneath his bowler hat, and his hands trembled slightly as he shuffled through his own copies of the evidence that Amelia was presenting to the chamber. "The case against Sirius Black was built on several key assumptions," Amelia continued, activating magical displays that showed enlarged versions of the original arrest documents. First, that Peter Pettigrew died in the explosion on that London street. Second, that Black was present at the scene as the perpetrator, rather than as someone attempting to apprehend the real criminal. Third, that Black had been the secret keeper for James and Lily Potter's hiding place. She paused to let the significance of these assumptions sink in before continuing. Recent evidence suggests that all three of these assumptions were incorrect. The silence that followed this statement was absolute. Even the magical recording devices that documented all Wizengamot proceedings seemed to hold their breath. "The first piece of evidence," Amelia said, casting a spell that projected a series of photographs into the air above the chamber, consists of surveillance images taken over the past month, showing Peter Pettigrew alive and active in various locations throughout magical Britain. The photographs were devastating in their clarity. Peter Pettigrew, unmistakably alive, meeting with known Death Eater sympathizers. Peter Pettigrew exchanging information for gold. Peter Pettigrew transforming between human and rat form with the practiced ease of someone who had been living a double life for years. Most damning of all was the final photograph, which showed Pettigrew in animated conversation with three wizards whose faces were clearly visible and whose identities were well known to everyone present. These individuals, Amelia continued, indicating the Death Eaters in the photograph, were all supposedly killed during the final battle at the Ministry 3 years ago. The fact that they are not only alive, but actively conspiring with Peter Pettigrew suggests that our intelligence about the aftermath of the war was significantly flawed. "How do we know these photographs are genuine?" demanded Augusta Longbottom, her voice carrying the sharp authority of someone who had lost too much during the war to accept convenient explanations. "They have been verified by 3 independent magical forensics experts," Amelia replied calmly. "The magical signatures are consistent, the temporal markers confirm the dates, and the locations have been cross-referenced with other surveillance data. These photographs are genuine." The weight of this confirmation seemed to settle over the chamber like a physical presence. "The second piece of evidence," Amelia continued, "consists of witness testimony that was never collected during the original investigation." She activated another spell, and the ghostly figure of a wizard appeared in the center of the chamber. The figure was translucent and clearly magical in nature, but its words carried the unmistakable authority of testimony given under veritaserum. "My name is Mundungus Fletcher," the figure announced in a voice that echoed strangely in the vaulted chamber. "On the night of November 1st, 1981, I witnessed the confrontation between Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew on a London street. The revelation sent a shock through the assembled officials. Mundungus Fletcher was a known petty criminal, but he was also known to be reliable when it came to observing events that might later prove profitable to remember. Peter Pettigrew was not the victim of that confrontation," the magical testimony continued. "He was the instigator. I saw him cast the explosive curse that destroyed the street and killed the Muggles. I saw him sever his own finger before transforming into a rat and escaping through the sewers." The implications of this testimony were staggering, but Mundungus was not finished. Sirius Black was attempting to apprehend Pettigrew, not attack him. Black was shouting accusations about betrayal and demanding that Pettigrew surrender himself to the authorities. When the explosion occurred, Black was thrown backward by the blast. He was not the one who cast the curse. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and urgent consultations as the full meaning of this testimony became clear. "Why was this witness never interviewed during the original investigation?" Augusta Longbottom demanded, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Because no one thought to look for witnesses," Amelia replied with devastating simplicity. "The evidence appeared clear-cut, the suspect was in custody, and there was significant pressure to resolve the case quickly in order to reassure the public that justice was being served. The third piece of evidence," she continued, raising her voice to cut through the continuing murmurs, "consists of documentation that was never examined during the original investigation. This time, the magical display showed copies of legal documents, their official seals glowing with authenticity charms that made tampering impossible. The will of James and Lily Potter, executed 6 months before their deaths, explicitly names Sirius Black as guardian for their son Harry Potter. More significantly, it explicitly rejects any placement of the child with Lily's sister, Petunia Dursley, citing concerns about her hostility toward the magical world. The document that appeared in the air above them was comprehensive and legally binding, its language leaving no doubt about James and Lily's intentions for their son's upbringing. Furthermore, Amelia continued, the will includes a detailed explanation of the security arrangements the Potters had made for their protection. According to this document, Peter Pettigrew was indeed the secret keeper for the Fidelius charm that concealed their location. The final piece of evidence was perhaps the most damaging to the original case. If Peter Pettigrew had been the secret keeper, then he was the only person who could have revealed the Potter's location to Voldemort. Sirius Black, regardless of his other alleged crimes, could not have betrayed information he did not possess. The silence that followed this revelation was profound and deeply uncomfortable. Minister Fudge finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a croak. Are you suggesting that we imprisoned an innocent man for 3 years? I am stating as a matter of documented fact that Sirius Black was convicted without trial, sentenced without proper legal representation, and imprisoned based on evidence that was circumstantial at best and fabricated at worst. The political implications of this statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. If Sirius Black was innocent, then every official who had been involved in his case had participated in a massive miscarriage of justice. More importantly, the public's faith in the magical justice system would be shattered beyond repair. What do you propose we do about this situation? Asked Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had been conspicuously quiet during the presentation. We do what we should have done 3 years ago, Amelia replied firmly. We conduct a proper investigation, we gather all available evidence, and we ensure that justice is served regardless of the political consequences. And if that means admitting that we made a catastrophic mistake, then we admit it, she said simply. The alternative is to continue perpetuating a lie that has already caused immeasurable harm to innocent people. The debate that followed was intense and often heated, with various officials attempting to find ways to minimize the damage to their own reputations and political positions. But the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss, and the legal precedents too clear to ignore. Meanwhile, in a secure location far from the ministry's political machinations, the subjects of their debate were preparing for the confrontation they all knew was inevitable. The safe house that Tonks had arranged for them was a significant upgrade from their previous accommodations, with proper bedrooms, a well-stocked library, and security measures that had been designed by Aurors, who understood the importance of keeping valuable witnesses alive long enough to testify. Harry had adapted to their improved circumstances with the same resilience he brought to everything else, though Sirius noticed that the boy seemed more subdued than usual in the aftermath of their encounter with the Death Eaters. "Are you all right?" Sirius asked as they sat by the fireplace after dinner, sharing the kind of quiet moment that had become precious during their weeks of constant movement and danger. "I keep thinking about what that man said," Harry replied quietly, "about bringing Voldemort back. Is that really possible?" "Unfortunately, yes," Sirius said, deciding that honesty was more important than protecting Harry from uncomfortable truths. Tom Riddle spent decades preparing for the possibility of death, and he created safeguards that would allow him to return under certain circumstances. "What kind of safeguards?" "Dark magic, Harry. The kind of magic that requires terrible sacrifices and leaves lasting damage to the person who uses it. The kind of magic that your parents died fighting against." Harry absorbed this information with the thoughtful attention he brought to all discussions of serious matters. "If he does come back, will I have to fight him again?" "I hope not," Sirius replied honestly. "I hope that when the truth comes out about Peter, and about what really happened to your parents, there will be enough people willing to stand against the darkness that you won't have to face it alone. But if I do have to fight him, then you'll be ready," Sirius promised. You'll have the training, the knowledge, and the support you need to do whatever has to be done. But more importantly, you'll know that you're fighting for something worth protecting, rather than something worth destroying. Harry nodded solemnly and returned his attention to the fire, apparently satisfied with this explanation. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Tonks arrived at their safe house with an official ministry document that bore the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the signature of Amelia Bones herself. "It's a formal invitation," Tonks announced, her hair cycling through several colors as her emotional state fluctuated between excitement and anxiety. "The Wizengamot wants to hear your testimony about the events of November 1st, 1981, and about Peter Pettigrew's activities since then." "A formal invitation," Sirius repeated carefully. "Not an arrest warrant?" "Not an arrest warrant," Tonks confirmed. "Amelia fought hard for that. You'll be testifying as a witness rather than as a defendant, though there will obviously be questions about your activities since the escape." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that could be problematic if you don't have good answers," Tonks admitted. "Taking Harry from the Dursleys could be construed as kidnapping, regardless of your motivations. And some of the methods you used to gather evidence about Peter might not be entirely legal. But the evidence itself is valid. The evidence itself is devastating." "Peter's finished, Sirius. There's no way the Ministry can ignore what you've uncovered, and there's no way they can avoid acknowledging that you were wrongly imprisoned. The prospect of finally being vindicated after 3 years of imprisonment and weeks of life as a fugitive should have been cause for celebration. Instead, Sirius found himself focusing on the potential dangers that public exposure might bring. "What about Harry?" he asked. "Will he be safe if this becomes public knowledge?" "That's the complicated part," Tonks admitted. "Once your innocence is established, Harry's custody situation will have to be reviewed. The Dursleys' treatment of him will come to light, and there will be questions about who should be responsible for his upbringing. Questions that Dumbledore will want to influence," Sirius said grimly. "Questions that a lot of people will want to influence," Tonks corrected. "Harry Potter isn't just any child. He's a symbol, a legend, a political asset. There will be individuals and factions who see controlling his upbringing as a pathway to controlling the future of the wizarding world." The reality of their situation crystallized with sudden clarity. Proving Sirius's innocence would free him from the charges that had destroyed his life, but it would also thrust Harry into a spotlight that could be just as dangerous as the cupboard under the stairs had been. "We'll face that when we come to it," Sirius decided. "Right now, the most important thing is making sure that Peter can't hurt anyone else, and that the truth finally comes out. When do we leave for the Ministry?" "Tomorrow morning," Tonks replied. "Amelia wants to get your testimony on record as quickly as possible before anyone has a chance to interfere with the process. And if someone does try to interfere, then we'll find out just how committed the Department of Magical Law Enforcement is to seeing justice done, regardless of the political consequences." That night, as Harry slept peacefully in a real bed with clean sheets and adequate blankets, Sirius found himself staring out the window at the London skyline and contemplating the strange turns his life had taken. 3 years ago, he had been a broken man rotting in a cell, convinced that he would die forgotten and despised. Tomorrow, he would walk into the Ministry of Magic as a free man, carrying evidence that would expose one of the greatest injustices in recent wizarding history. The question was, what would they all do with their freedom once the truth finally came to light?